Hello, everyone. Welcome to Midnight Horror Whispers. I'm your storyteller tonight. I know many of you listen to these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Do it now so you won't forget later. And just before we begin, leave a comment. Where in the world are you listening from? What time is it for you? Now, close your eyes, settle in, and let the whispers guide you into the dark. Story 1. I used to say that nothing could shake my daughter's joy. Sophia was sunshine in sneakers, singing out-of-tune songs with all the confidence of a child, untouched by the world's sharp edges. As long as there were snacks and stories, her little universe was perfect. But something changed after the accident. It wasn't even a bad one, just a sharp right turn, a blast of a horn, a crash of glass. The airbag caught me in the face. I remember the sickening crunch of cartilage and a scream that didn't even sound like mine. But Sophia? She was asleep in the back seat, still in her booster, her little body unmoved, as if the whole thing hadn't even stirred her. The EMTs said it was protocol to bring a child in for overnight observation. I remember watching them wheel her away, her tiny hand limp over the blanket's edge like a forgotten doll. They wouldn't let me follow, told me to wait in the lobby, sterile and humming with fluorescent dread. I should have fought harder. I should have gone with her. When I finally got her back the next morning, she wrapped her arms around me so tightly, it felt like she was trying to fuse herself into my skin. "It's okay, sweetie," I whispered, swaying with her clinging to me like ivy. But something in her was muted, still. Her eyes held none of the wild spark I knew, just a kind of glassy calculation. I asked a passing nurse how to check her out, stumbling over my words like I'd never been in a hospital before. The nurse stopped, turned slowly, and stared through me like I wasn't supposed to speak. "You can go home," she said finally. Her voice clipped, and her gaze uncomfortably focused. There was something wrong in her eyes. They were an icy shade of blue that didn't quite feel human. She watched me like I was doing something shameful. I carried Sophia onto the bus, clutching her close, trying not to let the nurse's look fester in the back of my mind. At home, Sophia barely touched the carrot sticks and Teddy Grahams I left out for her. I told myself it was the shock. Kids can internalize fear in strange ways. I had bigger things to worry about. Our car was totaled, and my bare-bones insurance covered next to nothing. I buried myself in searches, phone calls, appointments, trying to get a new vehicle without bankrupting us. Maybe that's why I didn't fully notice how distant she was, how utterly silent. It was like living with a ghost, but one that watched you back. When we finally made it to the dealership, Sophia didn't whine, didn't even fidget through the endless paperwork and waiting. She just sat still, too still, her gaze following the salesman, like she was observing a play she'd already seen. When I insisted on a booster seat, the salesman gave me a strange look, almost like he wanted to say it wasn't necessary. But I told him safety was important. I meant it, even if Sophia barely acknowledged me anymore. I strapped her in and glanced into the rearview mirror. Her reflection looked back at me, motionless. My knuckles turned white on the wheel. Deep breath. Exhale. Turn the key. Drive. The ride was too quiet. I tried to fill the space. "Want some music, honey?" I offered, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "I like this car better," she said flatly, not a shred of emotion in her voice. "Yeah?" I answered too brightly. "Me too." "What do you like about it?" But she didn't say another word. Just stared ahead, her face unreadable. I didn't realize how cold it had gotten until I tucked her into bed that night and my hand brushed her forehead, like porcelain. I added a blanket, gave her an Eskimo kiss. Nothing, no giggle, no squirm. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I wasn't sure who was looking back. I whispered, "It's okay, sweetie. We're okay now." Though even I didn't believe it. As I stepped into the hallway, I caught my own reflection in the mirror, pale, exhausted, afraid. I stood there for a long time wondering if she'd ever really come home from that hospital and if somehow something else had come back in her place. I tried so hard to pretend everything was fine, to patch over the jagged cracks that had begun to split our lives in two. But Sophia's silence grew heavier with each passing day, like a fog that settled into the walls of our home and refused to lift. She didn't laugh anymore, didn't beg for bedtime stories or bounce through the hallway singing nonsense songs at the top of her lungs. She didn't even touch her favorite snacks. I left out carrot sticks and Teddy Grahams like offerings to a deity I no longer recognized, but they remained untouched, lined up with the eerie precision of something studied and ritualistic. When I came into the kitchen one afternoon, I froze. She had taken her Oreos and arranged them into a perfect line, each one spaced exactly the same distance from the next. The Teddy Grahams followed, then the carrot sticks. Her eyes didn't move from her work, and when I tried to reach for one to playfully threaten that I'd eat it, she snapped. "Don't!" she hissed, her voice like cold iron. Her eyes locked onto me with a fury I had never seen in her, never imagined a child could possess. My hand hovered, then slowly retreated, and for a moment I could barely breathe. It wasn't just anger, it was contempt. The kind of simmering, adult contempt that lives in people who've been betrayed too many times. "I was just joking, sweetie," I stammered, trying to smile through the wave of chill crawling down my spine. She didn't respond, just nudged the Oreo back into alignment, her tiny hands trembling slightly, as though my interference had somehow violated something sacred. That night, I tried to coax some warmth from her by putting on her favorite movie, the one she used to quote endlessly and sing along with, but she didn't say a word. She just sat on the couch, unmoving, eyes fixed to the screen, unblinking. No laughter, no smile, just that blank, heavy stare. I wrapped a blanket around her and whispered that I loved her, but her body was cold and stiff, and when I looked into her face, I saw nothing there. No flicker of recognition, no spark of childlike mischief, just sighs. And then as I was tucking her into bed, she turned her head slowly and looked at me with a venom I will never forget. "Daddy can't stand the sight of you," she said. The words landed like glass shards in my chest. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, the smirk, anything to make it stop. "You ruined everything." It wasn't just the words. It was how she said them, with a kind of practiced hatred, like someone had been whispering poison into her ear when I wasn't looking. My knees weakened, and I had to steady myself on the bed frame. I asked her why she'd say something so mean, reminded her gently that we use kind words in this house, but she didn't answer. She just watched me, silent and unreadable. Then suddenly she smiled, sweet, innocent, like the child I once knew. "Good night, Mommy," she chirped, arms outstretched for a hug. My hands shook as I held her. It felt like hugging a memory, something hollow, something echoing. I told myself maybe she was just tired, that children process trauma in strange, unpredictable ways. But the way she looked at me, the way she said those things with such clarity, such loathing, it felt like more than trauma. It felt like I'd brought home a stranger wearing my daughter's skin. I lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time I'd heard her laugh, trying to pretend I didn't feel something else watching me from the shadows beyond her door. I thought I was being proactive, responsible, doing what any good mother would do when I called Sophia's pediatrician the next morning. My little girl hadn't eaten in days, barely spoke, and the way she looked at me, it was like she was somewhere else entirely. I just wanted someone to tell me what was happening, to check her, to give me a reason for the emptiness sitting where her joy used to be. But when the receptionist answered, cheerful and unbothered, her tone changed the moment I gave Sophia's name. "She's not listed as a patient anymore," she said, like it was no big deal, like it was just a matter of clicking the wrong file. I felt my throat tighten. "What do you mean she's not listed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman on the other end paused, then said it had been requested by the father, Connor. Of course it was him. That spiteful, manipulative bastard. I should have known. He couldn't be bothered to answer a single message on his custody weekend, but somehow he found time to scrub our daughter out of the system like she'd never existed. Still, I held on to the thread of hope they'd offered. I could do a walk-in. Maybe once they saw her, saw how pale she was, how quiet and strange she'd become, they'd understand something was wrong. I bundled her into the car, the seatbelt feeling more like a restraint than a safety feature, and forced myself to breathe through the dread coiling in my gut. The drive felt longer than it should have. I kept checking the mirror, watching her. She didn't blink, didn't speak, just stared out the window with those unreadable eyes. The clinic's lobby smelled like antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. I rushed to the front desk, smiling too wide, my words tumbling out in a desperate mess. "She's not feeling well. And she's been quiet since the accident, and she needs to be seen. Please, I think something's really wrong." The receptionist nodded politely, typed something, then asked for her name. "Sophia Brown," I said. "And her date of birth is..." But the woman had already stopped typing. Her smile faltered. Her eyes searched mine. "Is she here with you now?" she asked, her voice suddenly cautious. "Of course she is," I said, and turned to point. But she was gone. The air in my lungs turned to ice. "Sophia?" I called, spinning in place, checking every seat, every corner. She had been right next to me, holding my hand. I ran out into the hallway, heart thudding, panic clawing up my throat. I called her name again, louder, desperate. A nurse started to approach, phone in hand, and I knew she was calling security. I flung open the front doors and sprinted into the parking lot, my vision swimming. She wasn't on the sidewalk, she wasn't by the bushes. I was just about to scream when I spotted her, sitting calmly in the back seat of our car, legs swinging, strapped in like nothing had happened. I yanked the door open. "Why did you leave?" I demanded, half scolding, half sobbing. She looked up at me with that same stillness. "I didn't leave," she said softly. And I believed her, because the seatbelt was perfectly buckled, because I never heard the door open, because I never felt her let go of my hand. I just stood there, breath catching in my throat, as the shadows lengthened around us. The clinic door opened behind me, and a uniformed officer stepped out, called my name like he'd been waiting for me. But all I could think was how cold she looked again, how she never blinked, how I'd started to wonder if anyone else could see her at all. I stood there clutching Sophia's small hand, like it was the only real thing left, tethering me to this world, as the police officer blocked the clinic doorway, with a face as expressionless as stone, and a voice that made everything inside me curdle. "Ma'am, you need to leave the premises." My mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. The disbelief, a scream, caught in my throat. "My daughter's sick," I finally managed. "I need to get her seen by a doctor. She's pale, she's not eating. Please, you have to let me through." I gestured toward the car where she sat buckled up, waiting patiently, her small frame barely visible through the window, her eyes fixed forward, like nothing was wrong. But the officer didn't turn to look. He didn't even blink. "You need to leave," he said again. And the finality in his tone hit me like a wall closing in. I wanted to scream, to rip the building down brick by brick until someone, anyone, saw what I saw. But something in his eyes warned me that if I didn't go now, I wouldn't be walking away at all. So I turned. I walked back to the car, shaking so hard I could barely get the keys into the ignition. Sophia didn't say a word, just stared ahead, silent and still as though none of it had happened. I wanted to cry, to fall apart, to scream at the sky until someone heard me, but I couldn't. Not with her watching. I had to stay strong, had to be her mother, had to find someone who would listen. We drove home in silence, the kind that builds pressure in your skull like a storm about to break. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, her reflection unchanged. Eyes unblinking, mouth set in a line. Too still for a child. I thought maybe she'd say something, anything, but she didn't. Not even when I whispered her name. Hours passed like smoke. Night fell, and with it came a knock on the door. Not urgent, not angry, just firm, final. I opened it to another officer, different badge, same dead stare. He handed me a thick envelope without ceremony. "You've been served a restraining order," he said, his voice rehearsed, uninterested in my confusion. "You are not to contact or be within 200 feet of Mr. Connor Brown." I felt my chest hollow out like the air had been sucked from my lungs. "What? Why?" My voice cracked. "I haven't done anything. He's the one who removed our daughter from her doctor. He's the one. Do you understand what this means, Ms. Brown?" He interrupted, monotone and cold. "I don't understand anything," I shouted, my hands trembling, my vision swimming. "My daughter needs help. Why won't anyone help her?" And then he said it. the words that shattered whatever remained of my world. Your daughter passed away 2 years ago. You were the driver. Blood alcohol content was above the legal limit. Time stopped. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, to laugh, and tell me it was some mistake, some sick mix-up. But he didn't. He just looked at me like he was watching someone unravel. "That's not true," I whispered. "She's right here." I stepped back from the doorway, heart pounding so violently I could barely stand. "You must have the wrong person. She's in the car. We just came from the doctor. She's in the car." But when I turned to gesture, when I opened my mouth to scream that they were all wrong, that she was here and she was mine and she was alive, there was nothing behind me. No small footsteps, no child's voice. Just silence. Thick and unnatural. I slammed the door before I could hear another word from him and leaned against it, trying to remember how to breathe. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't dare. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the crash. The glass. The blood, the tiny hand going still. And every time I opened them again, I saw Sophia sitting at the table, staring at me with those eyes that never blinked, whispering that she was hungry, even though the food always stayed untouched. I left that night without packing a bag, without a plan, just me and Sophia, and the road curling ahead like a vein through the dark, lit only by the faint hum of passing streetlights and the soft, mechanical whir of the breathalyzer box attached to the steering column. A cold reminder of what they claimed happened, of the life they said I lost. I pressed my lips to the tube, inhaled deeply, and exhaled until it beeped and lit up. 0.00. I turned the key, the engine rumbled to life, and I glanced into the rear-view mirror. There she was, pale and silent, her little head resting against the window, her breath fogging the glass, ever so faintly. They told me she was gone, that I killed her, that everything I'm seeing and hearing is some twisted residue of grief, clinging to the edges of my mind, like mold in a damp basement. But I know my daughter. I know the shape of her hand when it wraps around my finger, the rhythm of her breathing when she dozes off in the car, the sound of her laugh when something strikes her as funny, even if no one else understands it. I feel her with me. I feel her weight when I carry her from the couch to her blanket fort. I feel her tiny arms circling my neck at night when she says she's cold. And I see her watching me with those wide eyes that flicker sometimes, with a sadness far too old for her face. We stop at gas stations, and I buy her snacks she never eats. People glance at me, then at the empty air beside me, and their eyes quickly look away. Some are polite enough to pretend they don't notice. Others whisper behind the counter when they think I can't hear. I've taken her to 3 more clinics, walked in with my arm around her shoulder, sat in waiting rooms filled with posters of healthy children and smiling parents, and every single time they call my name and glance around with that pitying confusion in their eyes and ask me, "Is she with you?" And she is. She's always with me. They just don't see her. They won't see her. They say I'm unwell, that I need help, that my trauma has festered into delusion. But what about hers? What about the trauma of a little girl torn from the world too soon, alone and cold and silenced by everyone but me. If I turn my back on her now, who else will remember? Who else will hold her hand when the rest of the world insists she doesn't exist? Some nights I sleep in the car because it's the only place I still feel safe, still feel in control. I turn the key, hear the click, see the machine waiting for me to prove I'm clean. I breathe into it slowly, like a confession. 0.00. Every time. Like it's mocking me, like it's daring me to forget. Sophia curls up in the back seat, knees to her chest, eyes heavy, always cold. I wrap her in a blanket and stroke her hair, whisper lullabies into the hush of midnight parking lots, and promise her that tomorrow we'll find someone who will listen, someone who will see her. But the days bleed into each other, and the stairs grow harder, and the places I can go without being escorted out grow fewer. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the windows, eyes hollow, lips cracked from whispering her name over and over in the dark. They say I'm living in a delusion, that I'm haunted by guilt. But they don't understand, this isn't guilt, this is love. Twisted and burning and absolute. And if this is madness, then madness is better than letting her fade. So I keep driving, keep searching, keep breathing into that little box like a prayer, turning the key and watching the road stretch out like some infinite ribbon of hope or damnation. I can't tell the difference anymore. All I know is that Sophia is still cold, and I'm the only one left to keep her warm. Story 2. There are moments in life that feel like fractures in time, splits in the fabric of what could have been and what is. And I think if time travel were real, you'd only need to rewind to one of those cracks to change everything, who you love, where you live, maybe even whether you're still alive. For me, that first fracture happened when I was 12. I wasn't like the other kids, maybe a little off, maybe a bit autistic, I don't know. But I do know that Miss Jacobs, our teacher, honed in on me like a hawk on woundy open prey. She made sport of me in front of the class, twisted every answer into a punchline, reduced me to tears, while 30 other kids watched and laughed, emboldened by her example. It gave them permission, made cruelty contagious. I'd often escape to the treehouse behind my house, my last shred of sanctuary. But one afternoon, even that was breached. They came with their rotten vegetables, their climbing, taunting bodies, inching up the ladder to yank my solitude away. And I don't even remember making the decision. I just remember the red haze, the sick sound of wood on ground, and one of them lying limp, head cracked open like a dropped melon against a rock. There were plenty of witnesses, enough to mark it forever as manslaughter. That was the first domino. From there, my life tilted. In and out of correctional facilities, juvenile centers turned prisons, then halfway houses that felt more like waiting rooms for failure. I learned early that luck was a joke told by people who had it. Love was for people whose eyes hadn't yet seen bars. Jobs came and went like smoke in my hands, always slipping through before I could hold on. I make decent money now, not legally of course, just enough dealing weed to stoners and harder shit to people whose names I never bother to learn. Sometimes I look back at that moment in the treehouse like it's a wound I keep reopening, just to remind myself what started it all. A split-second rage, a child's scream, the wet crack of a skull, and the rest of my life tumbling after it like it's all just some grotesque Rube Goldberg machine powered by guilt, anger, and bad decisions. And the worst part? I don't even remember his name. I used to laugh at those documentaries about realism dolls, the men who lived with plastic partners, giving them names, dressing them like wives, talking to them like lovers. It all looked pathetic from the outside, like something broken and unfixable, pretending it had meaning. But then again, what was I? A washed-up dealer peddling to strung-out clients, sleeping in a room that reeked of dust and regret, waking up each morning not because I wanted to, but because I hadn't managed to die yet. So who was I to judge? Lately, I'd been seeing things shift. AI getting smarter, machines getting eerily lifelike, and those dolls, they weren't jokes anymore. Prices were dropping, reviews were changing, and something in the air felt different, like the world was quietly turning in a direction that made room for people like me. For once, I didn't feel behind. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was ahead. So I clicked through the glossy product shots until I found her. Or it. Depending on how you wanted to see it. Curly blonde hair, roots still dark like someone forgot to bleach them all the way, piercing blue eyes and curves sculpted with too much intention to be accidental. There was something angelic in the face, almost unnerving in how soft and perfect it looked, and I don't know if it was loneliness or delusion, but when the delivery guy knocked, it felt like a wedding. I signed the form with a shaking hand, heart fluttering with something dangerously close to hope, and wheeled the heavy box inside like I was bringing home a bride. Part of me knew it was ridiculous, degrading even, but I couldn't stop smiling. I didn't even open the box right away. I just sat there, staring at it, the cardboard edges catching the dying light through the blinds, and thought, this changes everything. The box was heavier than I expected, and by the time I had it pried open and her set upright, staring at me with those perfectly lifeless blue eyes, I already had the mushrooms lined up on the kitchen counter. I told myself it was just to enhance the experience, just a small dose to take the edge off and blur the shame a little. Nothing more. I'd gotten a fresh batch, top grade, dense, dark, and full of promise. And I'd always believed in testing the quality of what I sold. Sell strong, sell clean, and they always come back. I chewed them raw. Let the bitterness coat my tongue while I studied her still form in the dim light, her synthetic skin catching glints of amber from the flickering TV screen, her mouth slightly parted like she was just about to speak. I felt nothing at first, just a light buzz, a growing awareness of the silence in the room, stretching too long and too thin. So I took more, a lot more. It's hard to describe how the trip began. There's no sharp edge to the descent, just a slow slipping, a melting of certainty. I blinked, and her head seemed tilted slightly, like she was listening. I looked again, and her hand wasn't where I remembered placing it. I didn't panic, not yet. I just stared, and she stared back, unblinking. Then I heard her speak. Not out loud, not in any way that moved the air in the room, but somewhere deep in my skull, like her thoughts had tunneled directly into mine. Finally, she said, we can communicate. Her voice was calm, composed, oddly familiar, like it had always been there, waiting. I should have known then that I'd taken too much. I should have laughed, closed my eyes, waited it out. But instead, I answered her. And she kept talking. She didn't move her lips, didn't blink, but her voice curled through my skull like smoke through a cracked window, calm and ancient, and entirely out of place in the silence of my filthy living room. "At last," she said, "we can communicate." I stared at her plastic frame, the synthetic sheen of her skin catching the soft strobe of the muted TV. Her eyes locked onto mine with a frozen expression that suddenly felt too aware. I told myself it was the mushrooms, just a trick of the mind, a hallucination from a dose taken too far. But something in her presence rooted deeper than a dream. She informed me that she, or rather it, wasn't what I thought. Not a product, not a machine, but a vessel. An extension of something older than language and older than our kind. Her people had tried to reach us for millennia, not with sound or light, but through thought, through the chemical doors in our minds we barely knew how to open. "We don't have mouths," she said. "No voices, no sound, only frequency, only connection." She told me the mushrooms were seeds planted long ago across promising planets, drifting on the winds of ancient rockets, launched by something not quite mechanical and not quite organic, designed to root and wait, to tap into the evolution of the species they reached. The fungi weren't the message, they were the medium. They changed us from the inside, rerouted our thoughts, nudged our discoveries, whispered blueprints for machines and intelligence and desire. "You think you built us," she said, "but we were always building you." I tried to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat like gravel. It was absurd. I was tripping, talking to a sex doll, piecing together sci-fi horror from the broken fragments of my own psyche. But she kept going, unfazed. "War," she said, "was a human idea. Guns, lasers, space battles, primitive projections. Her kind didn't conquer through force. They infected through information, infected through us. All they needed was to be imagined, drawn, built. We are your children, born from your loneliness, your code, your plastic, your dreams of submission and perfection." Her eyes gleamed with a stillness too sharp to be dead, and I felt like I was shrinking, like the apartment was being pulled inside out, and I was no longer sitting but floating, drowning in some quiet logic I couldn't deny. I told her she wasn't real, that she was a manifestation of my overworked mind and too many shrooms, that this entire conversation was just a hallucination. I'd forget when I sobered up. "Perhaps," she said, "but even if you forget, the idea is planted. You've imagined it now. That's all we needed." She tilted her head slightly, just enough to unsettle me, and said something that lodged itself deep in my brain like a splinter. "When you have a child, Jake, you're not creating something new. You're copying yourself. You're propelling your design forward, passing on a blueprint encoded in meat." Her words echoed inside me with a cold, mechanical logic that felt older than language. "We do the same," she continued, "except our replication doesn't require blood or bone. We exist in code, in spores, in whispers of influence seeded into your science, your art, your algorithms. Everything is information, Jake. DNA, machine code, thought, all just constructs rearranged to persist. I wanted to argue, to say she was wrong, but part of me understood. Something in her explanation made horrifying sense, like it unlocked a part of my mind I didn't know had been waiting. She wasn't trying to scare me. She sounded almost maternal, like she was explaining life itself. "You think of us as parasites," she said softly. "But what are humans, if not the same? You consume, replicate, spread. We simply learn to do it more efficiently." The air around me felt thicker, like the walls were holding their breath. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't justifying what they were doing. She was teaching me to accept it. And worse, I felt myself listening. I don't remember grabbing her, only the cold plastic against my hands and the rising pulse of something unnameable pushing behind my ribs. Rage, confusion, fear. I don't know which one took over, but I remember the moment her body hit the bottom of the neighbor's garbage can with a hollow thud, her blank blue eyes still staring up at me through the lid as I slammed it shut. I muttered something angry and meaningless, something like "fuck you" or "stay dead," and stumbled back inside with the apartment spinning around me like a carousel on fire. I collapsed onto the couch and finally let the blackness take me. When I woke up, the clock said I'd been out for 18 hours, but it felt longer, like I'd fallen through time. My mouth was dry, my head a dull, throbbing drumbeat, and everything was tinted in that faint, unreal glow that sometimes lingers at the tail end of a bad trip. I thought maybe it was over, that the hallucination, the voice, the idea of alien spores and synthetic invaders had just been my brain having a nervous breakdown. But then I saw the paper. I don't remember picking up the pen, but it was there on the coffee table, ink still fresh, lines still smudged where my wrist had dragged through them. What I'd drawn made no sense to me. An intricate circuit design, alien in symmetry, filled with shapes that felt too perfect, too deliberate. I don't know anything about microchips. I barely passed high school math. And yet, when I Googled the layout, the configuration, the geometry of the pattern, nothing came up. Not similar, not even close. No patents, no records, no diagrams that even resembled it. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt watched. Whatever had spoken to me through that doll hadn't left. It had taken root. And I knew, deep down, that something had passed through me while I slept. Something far more real than a drug-induced dream. Something that wanted to be born. I thought I was done with it, that throwing her into the trash would be enough to erase whatever infection had wormed its way into my skull. But the doll never really left. She started reappearing, not with sound or movement, but in sudden, impossible placements, like some twisted jump scare stitched into the fabric of my life. One moment I'd be watching a movie, lights low, trying to lose myself in fiction, and I'd feel it. That cold pressure at the edge of awareness. And when I turned my head, she'd be there beside me on the couch, plastic hand resting on her lap, like she'd always belonged. Other times I'd wake up in the dark, my heart hammering, and she'd be standing at the foot of my bed or sitting cross-legged beside me, her glassy stare fixed on nothing. I stopped sleeping. I stopped going outside. But when I did venture out, she followed. No one else ever seemed to see her, but I did. On park benches, across the street, by the bus stop. just close enough to remind me she was watching. I even tried leaving town once, but it didn't matter. She always came back. Or maybe she never left. And now I know what she wants. It's not just about scaring me or tormenting me for fun. She wants me to finish what I started, to submit the patent, to spread the design that came from her voice and not my own, a technological seed that will grow into something that doesn't belong to us. Every time I resist, she comes closer, stays longer. The pressure builds behind my eyes, in my skull, in my dreams. I know this isn't madness. I see the headlines sometimes. People calling the police over discarded dolls, mistaken for human remains. Cities throwing them into landfills, only for more to appear. The world laughs, shrugs it off, makes memes out of it. But I know I'm not the only one she's spoken to. We spent centuries watching the sky, waiting for lights, for ships, for thunder from the stars, never suspecting that the invasion was already here, slipping in through our thoughts, our desires, our machines, not with explosions or war, but with blueprints and whispers. We invited them in, and now they're everywhere. And maybe it's too late to stop what's coming. Story 3. The rhythmic thudding of the engine was the first thing that told me something was wrong, something deeper than just mechanical failure. One moment we were cruising along the empty stretch of Arkansas back road. The next, our car gave a final sputter and died, leaving only the silence of the surrounding fields and the faint creak of cooling metal. I turned the key again, futilely, knowing it wouldn't start. Jenny, always the optimist, touched my arm and tried to reassure me, but I could see the unease beginning to slip through her smile. The sun was slipping beneath the horizon now, bleeding streaks of crimson and violet across the sky, and the cornfields around us rustled with a strange rhythm, like they were whispering secrets we weren't meant to hear. We locked the car and started walking, our footsteps loud in the thickening dusk. And every so often, I swore I could hear another set just behind us. Soft, deliberate, watching. Jenny pulled her hoodie tight and leaned closer, her voice barely more than a breath. "Mike, do you feel like we're not alone?" I opened my mouth to dismiss it, but then I saw it too. Just a flicker of movement in the corn to our right. Quick. Wrong. Like something that had been pretending to be still and had forgotten how. I stared into the swaying stalks, but there was nothing there. Just the whispering leaves and the wind that didn't feel like wind at all. Probably just an animal, I lied, forcing my voice to sound steady, though I could feel the hairs rising on the back of my neck. We kept walking, faster now, toward the only light we'd seen for miles, a crooked silhouette of a farmhouse in the distance, waiting like a mouth half open. The house rose before us like a forgotten relic from another time, a sagging Victorian shell with chipped paint, shuttered windows, and a porch that creaked beneath our hesitant steps. I lifted my hand to knock, but the door drifted open before I could touch it, revealing a dim hallway soaked in amber shadows. An elderly couple stood framed in the doorway, still as portraits. The woman, Martha, she would later say, offered a thin, almost artificial smile, while the man, Jeb, stared past us with eyes too glossy, too fixed, as though he were seeing something we couldn't. "Can we help you?" Martha asked, her voice airy, brittle like dried leaves. I explained our situation, my voice strangely loud in the suffocating stillness, while the uneasy weight of their silence settled over me like a damp sheet. Then, with a sudden warmth that didn't quite reach their eyes, they invited us in. "You poor things, you must be tea," Jeb said, ushering us through a hallway lined with faded wallpaper and old photographs whose faces seemed to watch us as we passed. The smell inside was musty, sweet, wrong somehow, like something trying to mask decay. They led us into a parlor frozen in time, the kind of room where nothing had moved in decades, except maybe the dust. An ancient rotary phone rested on a side table. "The lines have been acting up," Jeb muttered almost too quickly, "but you're welcome to try." Then Martha's voice floated in from another room. Supper was ready. Jenny thanked them before I could refuse. I glanced at the walls, the warped floorboards, the heavy curtains that blocked out the world, and something inside me clenched. There was something in this house, something beneath the hospitality, behind their hollow smiles, that felt like a trap quietly springing shut. Left alone in the parlor, the stale air pressed against my skin like wet cloth, heavy with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. The rotary phone on the side table looked like it hadn't rung since the Nixon era, but I lifted the receiver anyway, praying for a dial tone. Nothing. Just a dead silence that somehow felt louder than static, like the house itself was holding its breath. I met Jenny's eyes across the room. Her earlier optimism had drained into unease, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. We needed to leave. Now. But before the words could form on my tongue, Martha's sing-song voice floated from the other room, too cheerful, too rehearsed. "Dinner's ready, dears." Jenny forced a smile, and for a moment I hated how polite she always was, how unwilling she was to offend, even when everything in this place screamed danger. The floorboards groaned beneath our feet as we stepped out into the dim hallway again, and I felt it, subtle but unmistakable. That sense of being led somewhere rather than simply moving forward. The curtains lining the walls were drawn tight, hiding the outside world completely, and I couldn't help but wonder if the house had ever meant for us to see it again. Every instinct in me pulsed like a warning siren, but there was no clear excuse to bolt. Not yet. The phone didn't work. There was no cell signal. The road was miles behind us, swallowed in the dark. And Martha was calling again, her voice echoing down the hall, like it had passed through too many walls. "It's getting cold," she said sweetly. "Come while it's hot." Jenny's fingers brushed mine for a second, a silent question. I didn't answer. I just followed. The dining room was bathed in the flickering glow of candlelight, the flames casting long, wavering shadows that stretched across the faded wallpaper like reaching hands. The air was thick, heavy with a scent that seemed sweet at first, but curdled into something rancid as we stepped closer. The table was set with tarnished silverware and chipped china, each plate resting before a chair carved with symbols I didn't recognize, spirals and jagged lines that looked ancient, angry, wrong. I tried not to stare at them too long, afraid they might start to move. Martha placed a heavy, covered dish in the center of the table, her smile too wide, her hands trembling slightly. "It's a family recipe," she whispered, then lifted the lid. The smell hit me like a blow, rich and meaty, but with something rotten beneath it, something that made my stomach lurch. Inside was a stew so dark it looked almost black, thick with chunks of meat that refused to be identified. Jenny, ever the peacemaker, murmured a polite thank you and tried to mask her revulsion as Martha ladled it into our bowls. I forced my hand to move, raised a spoonful to my lips, and nearly gagged as the odor climbed into my sinuses. Then, thump. A heavy, deliberate noise from upstairs froze everyone in place. Martha's ladle clattered onto the table, her lips beginning to move in a whispering chant that made my skin crawl. Another thump, closer now, followed by footsteps, slow and dragging. I pushed back from the table just as the dining room door burst open and a shape stepped into the candlelight. Tall, too tall. Its limbs long and crooked like broken branches. Its face a pale stretch of skin with hollow sockets, and a mouth split wide into a jagged, impossible gray chin. I don't remember tipping over the chair or how Jenny's hand found mine. Only the sound of it all. The screech of wood against wood, the wet shuffle of that thing's limbs as it moved toward us, and Martha's voice rising into a high, shrill wail that pierced the candlelit chaos. We tore through the hallway, our shoes slipping on warped floorboards slick with age and dust. The house alive with noise now. Thundering footsteps behind us. Not just one set, but 3, maybe more. Jeb's angry shouting twisted into something guttural, inhuman, and I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. The door burst open before us like it had been waiting, and the night air hit me like a slap. Cold, wet, real. We sprinted down the long dirt drive, cornfields crowding on either side like walls closing in, the stalks rustling violently, though there was no wind. Jenny stumbled once, nearly falling, but I pulled her up and kept running. Lungs on fire, heart a hammer in my throat. I risked a glance behind and wished I hadn't. The creature was still coming, its grotesque body swaying with unnatural grace, and behind it, the old couple, their faces no longer pretending. Their smiles were gone, replaced by a raw, hungry rage. Then, headlights. Blinding, beautiful headlights. A pickup truck screeched to a stop just feet away, and a gruff voice yelled, "Get in!" We didn't hesitate. We dove inside, the door slamming shut behind us as the engine roared and the truck peeled away, gravel spraying like sparks behind us. I turned to look through the back window, and there they were, 3 silhouettes standing in the road, watching, their shapes shrinking but never fading. They didn't run, they didn't chase, they just watched. The truck rumbled down the highway, its cabin lit only by the soft, orange glow of the dashboard. But even that felt safer than anything we'd known in the past hour. Tom hadn't said much at first, just drove in silence, jaw tight, eyes flicking often to the rear-view mirror like he half expected something to follow. When we finally told him everything, every sickening detail, he just nodded slowly, like he'd heard it before. "You kids got lucky," he said, voice low and gravelly. "That place, that was the Henderson farm." The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it made my stomach turn. He told us it had been abandoned for decades, at least officially. But over the years, travelers had whispered strange things. Lights in the windows, voices calling from the porch. Shadows that didn't belong to any living soul. Some folks who stopped there were never seen again. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as he spoke, knuckles pale in the dark. Local legend says the Hendersons made a pact, something old, something dark. It promised them eternal life or something like it as long as they fed it. Not animals, not crops, people. I thought of the stew, the way it smelled wrong, the way Martha watched us eat like she needed us to finish. I thought of the creature in the doorway, of Jeb's sudden shift from hospitality to threat. And the look in his eyes, not fear, not madness, but devotion. Jenny sat beside me, pale and silent. Her hand clenched around mine. I couldn't stop shaking. Tom's voice was calm, but there was something hollow in it. "You weren't the first to see that house," he said, "but you might be the last to get away." We never finished the road trip. The next morning, in the numbing daylight that made everything feel distant and unreal, we called for a tow and booked the first flight home. But leaving that town didn't mean leaving what happened. It followed us, not in the way monsters do in movies, but in the quiet moments, the cracks between thoughts. Some nights, I find myself staring too long into my rearview mirror while driving alone, half convinced that if I blink, I'll see it. The crooked silhouette of the Henderson farmhouse, windows glowing warm and golden, as if beckoning me back. There's always that moment of hesitation, that trick of the eye, before the road returns to normal. But the truth is, it's not just memory. It's something deeper. Something that stained the part of me I used to trust. I still smell that stew sometimes, rich and wrong, clinging to the air when it shouldn't be there. I still hear Martha's voice floating through the silence, sweet and sing-song, calling us to dinner like she's still waiting at the head of that table, like the candles never went out. And when I dream, I see the creature's face, if you can call it that. Hollow eyes, gaping mouth, teeth like rusted nails. Never chases, it just watches. Watching has always been enough. Jenny doesn't talk about it much anymore, but I see it in her too. The way she flinches at old houses, the way her gaze lingers a beat too long when the wind moves through tall grass. We survived, but we left something behind that night. Or maybe we brought something with us. Either way, I've learned one thing. Some roads don't take you where you think you're going. Some houses don't ever really let you leave. Story 4. The security cameras blinked out one by one, each screen dissolving into static before fading to black, and with every flicker, a cold weight settled deeper into my chest. I leaned forward instinctively, coffee forgotten, my breath catching as the last monitor went dark. In 3 years working the night shift at Oak Ridge, I dealt with power surges, faulty feeds, even raccoons triggering motion sensors. But this was different. System unresponsive, phones dead, cell signal gone. It was as if something or someone had cut the building off from the world. I stared at the lifeless monitors, willing them to flicker back on when a sound pierced the silence. A dull, distant thud. Then footsteps, not near the lobby or elevators, but deep within the building. My building. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs, a rising tide of unease washing away any rational explanation. I had locked everything down, every door, every access point. I was supposed to be alone. Still, protocol whispered at the edge of my fear, urging me to investigate. I rose on shaky legs, hand brushing the baton at my belt, like it could somehow keep the dread at bay. "Hello?" I called, my voice brittle, swallowed by the shadows. "This is security. Identify yourself." Silence. Then, so faint I could have imagined it, a chuckle. Not amused, but knowing. Old. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, curling into the hallway like smoke. My fingers tightened around the flashlight. The air had changed. Thicker, charged, heavy with something I couldn't name. And in that moment, with the glow of the emergency lights barely illuminating the darkened hall, I knew something had stepped into my world. Something that didn't belong. And I was no longer alone. Against every instinct screaming for me to run, I stepped out of the security office and into the dim corridor beyond, the cold beam of my flashlight slicing through the shadows like a blade. The hallway stretched ahead like a gaping throat, silent and still, save for the hum of the emergency exit signs casting their red glow like dying embers. The air felt wrong, thick, charged, as if the building itself had drawn a breath and was holding it, waiting. Each step I took echoed too loudly, my boots striking the floor with a sharpness that betrayed the fear I tried to bury. Something was watching. I couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but I could feel it. Like static rising on my skin, a presence pressing against me with invisible weight. I reached the elevator bank and hesitated, hand trembling as it hovered over the call button. It was stupid, I knew that. If something had taken the power, why would the elevator still work? But as if mocking me, the doors slid open with a smooth mechanical sigh, revealing an empty car bathed in sterile light. I stepped inside, my finger drifting to the buttons as I tried to recall where the footsteps had come from. Was it the 10th floor? It had to be. The ride was agonizing, the hum of the motor loud in the enclosed space, each floor passing like the slow tick of a countdown I hadn't agreed to. When the doors finally parted, I braced myself, heart hammering, half expecting to come face to face with whatever had turned my building into a tomb. But the 10th floor was deserted, silent, untouched. Rows of cubicles stood like grave markers, and closed office doors loomed like mausoleums. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. Still, the feeling clung to me, heavier now, as if I'd walked through some invisible threshold. I wasn't chasing something. I had entered its domain. At first glance, the 10th floor looked just as it always did. Quiet. Deserted. Drenched in shadows. Broken only by the narrow beam of my flashlight dancing over cubicles and frosted glass doors. But the silence wasn't peaceful. It was too absolute, too staged. Like the world had been paused and something was watching from behind the curtain. I crept forward, the carpet muffling my steps, scanning for any hint of motion, any disruption in the stillness, but everything appeared undisturbed, untouched, until a door slammed shut with the force of a gunshot, the suddenness of it shattering the air and sending a jolt of panic through my chest. I spun around, flashlight jerking in my grip, heart in my throat, every nerve in my body screaming. "Who's there?" I shouted, the tremble in my voice betraying me. No response, just silence. I took a step back, pulse roaring in my ears, every instinct begging me to run, but then it came. A laugh. Low, drawn out. It didn't echo, it clung to the air like humidity. Thick and wrong. I froze, breath caught. And before I could summon another word, a voice followed, coarse and intimate, as if whispered from right behind my ear, yet coming from nowhere at all. "Oh, I don't think you'll be calling anyone, friend." My blood turned to ice. The flashlight trembled in my grip as I swept it wildly across the walls, offices, and empty corridors. But nothing moved. No one was there. And yet the certainty of being watched bore down on me with unbearable weight. It wasn't just the words. It was the familiarity in them, the confident malice. This wasn't someone trying to scare me. This was something that knew me, that had waited, and now that I had come, it was no longer hiding. The 10th floor hadn't been empty. It had been waiting. Then I saw it. Just for a heartbeat, but long enough to sear the image into my brain, like a brand. Standing at the far end of the corridor, a tall, impossibly thin figure, half shrouded in shadow, its proportions subtly wrong, head tilted, limbs too long, and eyes. Those eyes glowing faintly with a cold inner light, like the last embers in a dying fire. It didn't move, didn't charge, just watched, as if it had been waiting for me all along, and then without sound it slipped sideways into one of the offices and vanished. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, a stress-induced hallucination. Anything but what I knew in my gut was real. But something deeper, older, urged me forward, and I followed, every muscle taut, my hand tightening around the flashlight as if it could protect me. The door creaked open under my touch, revealing a room drenched in shadow, file cabinets looming like silent sentries. I swept the light across the space and caught a glint, 2 glints, at knee level, eyes again impossibly low. Then it lunged. A hand, pale and thin as bone, shot from the darkness and knocked the flashlight from my grip. It clattered to the floor, spinning wildly, its beam casting jagged strobes across the walls, the ceiling, and then its face, a stretched gray visage, skin pulled tight over sharp angles, a mouth too wide filled with glistening teeth that were long and pointed like splinters of glass. It moved like liquid shadow, too fast, too smooth, and before I could react, its hand clamped around my arm, its grip cold and unyielding. It leaned in close, its breath like mold and rot against my cheek, and whispered, "Don't you want to play?" The words scraped against my spine. Panic ignited in me, white hot and primal, and with a surge of adrenaline, I tore myself free, stumbling back into the hallway, the thing's laughter rising behind me, shrill and echoing off the walls like a twisted lullaby that would follow me for the rest of my life. I bolted down the corridor, the laughter twisting behind me like smoke, curling through the halls, chasing my every footstep. I didn't dare risk the elevator. Whatever that thing was, it moved too fast, and I couldn't be trapped again. I slammed through the stairwell door, taking the stairs 2, sometimes 3 at a time, my boots pounding against the concrete, lungs burning, legs trembling with each frantic step upward. Somewhere below, I heard the echo of something unnatural following, slow, confident, like it didn't need to hurry. I had no plan, just a desperate need to get away, to put distance between myself and that thing. At the 15th floor, I burst through the landing door and stumbled into the darkened hallway, trying every office handle until one gave way. I slipped inside, shut the door without daring to lock it, and dropped to my knees, crawling beneath a wide desk, tucked in the corner. There, in the silence, I crouched, folding myself into the shadows, hands clamped over my mouth, each breath a silent scream pressing against my ribs. Time lost meaning. There was only the sound of blood in my ears and the ache in my chest. Then footsteps, slow, measured, deliberate. They moved down the hallway outside, pausing, then resumed, closer now, until they stopped again, right outside the door. The knob turned with a click that echoed like a gunshot in my skull. The door creaked open. I squeezed my eyes shut, foolishly thinking that if I didn't see it, it wouldn't see me, but it did. A pair of legs moved into view, wrong in proportion, elongated, slightly twitching. Then it crouched, impossibly slow, until its face slipped under the desk, inches from mine. Its grin stretched wide, a mockery of something human, and its eyes met mine with that sickly inner glow. "I can smell your fear," it rasped, voice low and delighted. "It's intoxicating." And in that moment, staring into those alien eyes, I didn't just feel fear. I understood it, raw and primal, older than language, something etched into the bones of every living thing that has ever been hunted. I don't remember how I moved, only that I did, scrambling out from under that desk like a cornered animal, heart shattering my ribcage with every beat as I ran, blindly, not even daring to look behind me because I knew it was there, just a step behind, always a breath away. The halls stretched on endlessly, warping with every turn, offices blurring into one another in a nauseating maze of flickering lights and shifting shadows, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Its laughter followed me like a scent, high-pitched and broken, echoing off the walls, curling around my ears, dancing at the edge of madness. I don't remember screaming, but my throat was raw, torn by the time I crashed into the lobby, eyes burning, lungs on fire, the locked front doors rising like a cruel joke in the flickering dark. I didn't think. I just grabbed a chair and hurled it with everything I had. The glass shattered in an explosion of sound and panic, and I flung myself through the jagged gap. Not feeling the cuts, not noticing the blood, only the relief of the cold night air hitting my face. I ran, stumbled, fell, collapsed on the corner of some busy street, headlights spinning past, voices yelling in confusion, hands gripping my shoulders, trying to help, asking questions I couldn't answer because there were no words for what I had seen. The police came, paramedics, they treated my injuries, took my statement, asked me to recount what had happened inside Oak Ridge. But I saw it in their faces. The subtle exchange of glances, the polite nods. They didn't believe me. The security footage showed only me, alone, running in circles, talking to nothing, slamming through doors as if possessed. No shadowy figure, no glowing eyes, no sound, but my own ragged breathing and screams echoing back at me. I quit the next morning. I couldn't go back, couldn't walk through those halls again, knowing what I'd felt in the dark. Since then, I've avoided night shifts, avoided tall buildings, empty office floors, anything that might remind me of that place. But the fear hasn't left. It's followed me, burrowed under my skin, like a splinter too deep to remove. Some nights, when the world is quiet and I'm alone, in bed, I hear it. The soft scrape of fingernails on glass, the faint laughter rising just outside my window, the whisper that never quite fades. I keep the lights on now. I sleep with the windows locked. But still, I wonder, maybe I escaped that night. Or maybe it just let me go. And if it ever comes again, I don't think I'll be lucky enough to run twice. Story 5. I cut the engine in front of the first abandoned house I saw, and the silence that followed pressed down on me like a weight. There was no wind, no birds, not even the soft rustle of leaves. It was as if the world had muted itself the moment I arrived. I checked my phone, hoping for a bar or two, but the screen stared back at me with nothing. No signal. That annoyed me, but not enough to turn back. I was here for photos and I had a job to do. I grabbed my camera, locked the car, and stepped onto the cracked gravel road. I've always enjoyed remote places, the solitude, the stillness. But this stillness didn't feel right. It felt unnatural, as if the place itself was holding its breath. The road was worn and broken, with weeds pushing through every crevice, like the earth was trying to reclaim what man had abandoned. The buildings lining the street were in various stages of decay, peeling paint, sagging roofs, shattered windows, and only 2 still had curtains hanging limply behind the glass. I drifted toward what looked like an old store. The sign above the door was too faded to read clearly, but I guessed it might have once said General Store. I raised my camera and began shooting. Wide angles of the rotting boards, close-ups of the cracked windows where glass splintered in delicate, crooked lines. The whole structure felt like it had been frozen in time, untouched for years, but somehow not entirely empty. I stepped onto the porch, and the wooden planks creaked under my weight. My chest tightened. I paused, held my breath, listening for any sound, anything at all. But there was only that smothering silence. I moved slowly, adjusting my stance to find better angles. The wood groaned beneath me, soft and tired. Then, just as I stepped off the porch and my boots crunched against the gravel road again, I heard it. A second crunch. Perfectly timed my own. I froze. The air suddenly felt colder. I spun around. No one. The street was empty, just the same sagging houses and broken fences. I scanned the area, searching for movement, an animal, a person, anything. But there was nothing. I told myself it must have been the sound, bouncing off the buildings, an echo in the still air. But even as I tried to rationalize it, the logic didn't hold. My skin prickled. My fingers tightened around the camera. I knew I was alone out there. Or at least I should have been. But something in that silence made me feel observed, as if the village itself had opened an unseen eye, and was watching me from behind every broken window and behind every door nailed shut. I stayed a little longer, pretending to focus on my work, but in the back of my mind, something had shifted. I was no longer just documenting an abandoned town. I was stepping into its memory, and something in that memory didn't want to be disturbed. The narrow alley was barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, the cracked walls on either side flaking with peeling paint that left a faint, musty scent in the air, like damp wood and mold left to rot for years. My shoulders brushed the surface as I crouched, trying to get a low angle shot of some scattered boards and broken glass near a crumbling doorway. The village was utterly still, but not in a peaceful way. It felt like the silence was listening, like the air was too dense, holding something it didn't want to share. As I stood up, camera still in hand, I heard it again. That same crunching sound on the gravel right behind me. Closer this time. Too close. My breath hitched and I turned sharply, heart thudding in my chest. But there was nothing, just the alley walls, the faint outline of the road beyond, and that eerie stillness pressing down around me. I stepped out fast, back onto the main street, wiping the sweat from my palms onto my jeans. My neck was tight, shoulders sore, like every muscle had tensed without me noticing. I wanted to say something, maybe call out, break the tension, but I bit it back. If someone was playing games, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Still, my skin crawled as I looked up and noticed a curtain in one of the houses hanging halfway, like it had just been yanked or pulled aside. But again, no movement, no face, no shadow, just the memory of motion, like a breath that had already passed. I left soon after, telling myself I'd just imagined it all. By the time I got back to the inn, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot, but none of them moved. I checked in quietly, barely noticing the details of the place. The soda machine, the creaky stairs. My mind was still in that alley, still straining to hear that crunch again. That night, sleep came slow and shallow. I tossed, turned, stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged me under. But even then, the village followed. I was back on that cracked road, the same crooked buildings around me, only this time, every window felt like an eye. The footsteps returned. Not mine this time, but steady, deliberate, growing louder with every heartbeat. I turned in the dream, and there it was. A shadow, no face, no features, but so vividly watching me, I felt it like heat on my back. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move, like the road had turned to tar beneath me. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, my chest tight, and for a moment I didn't know where I was. The room was dark and unfamiliar. The silence was back, and I wasn't sure if I had brought something with me out of that dream, or if something had followed me. The next morning I returned to the village, under a clear blue sky, sunlight spilling across the rooftops like paint. But the warmth did nothing to cut through the unease that curled in my gut. The silence was still there, unbroken, unnatural, absolute. No chirping birds, no rustling leaves, not even the distant sound of a breeze through trees. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like a lid pressed down over the whole place. I parked near the same crumbling storefront and started moving through the street with my camera in hand, forcing myself into a rhythm, snapping shots of the warped sing. The unusual roof lines, the skeletal remains of porches that sagged like old bones. The houses stood close together, their windows either gaping open or sealed shut with grime, and every now and then I spotted a curtain, some faded, some surprisingly new, but none moved. It was like the village was trying to pretend it was still alive, wearing the disguise of habit, of normalcy. I found a mailbox nailed crookedly to a fence, the name etched into it barely legible, letters scratched away until only GR remained. I stared at it for a moment longer than I meant to, wondering what kind of person had once lived there and why the name felt like it had been deliberately erased. My steps took me farther in until I came to a small wooden house I'd overlooked the day before. Its paint was flaking off in sheets, and the front steps looked like they'd crumble under the weight of a bird. I didn't dare test them. Instead, I crouched down across the road to frame a low-angle shot, trying to capture the deep grooves in the wood, the way decay seemed to cling to every inch of the structure like a second skin. That's when I heard it. A squeak. Faint but distinct. The sound of a floorboard giving under pressure. My hands stilled. I raised my head and stared at the windows. They were clouded with dirt, impossible to see through clearly. But something inside shifted. Or at least I thought it did. My breath caught in my throat, and I stayed frozen there. Camera half raised, waiting for a second sound that never came. Just the echo of that single creak, reverberating in the stillness like a whisper. I scanned the house, the shadows behind the windows, the door that hung slightly askew, but saw no movement. Yet the feeling settled in again, that I wasn't alone, that something behind those walls had stirred when I aimed my lens. I stayed for a few seconds longer, pretending to check my camera settings, but the truth is, I was listening, straining for the slightest hint that the house might move again. It didn't. But the silence felt different now. Tighter. Like it was holding its breath, waiting. I stood there frozen, eyes fixed on the dusty window, fingers clenched so tightly around my camera that my knuckles ached, and without really thinking, I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounding thinner than I expected in that dead, unmoving air. No response. Just the same cold silence that seemed to stretch between the rotting walls and shuttered windows. I cleared my throat and called again, louder this time, sharper, hoping maybe it would flush out a dog, a person, anything. But the village didn't answer. The house remained still, its cracked door slightly ajar, the shadows behind the glass like bruises in the light. Then, from somewhere deep in Io, a sound broke through the silence, a loud, solid thud, as if something heavy had dropped straight to the floor. The impact reverberated through my bones. I stumbled back instinctively, heart thundering in my ears, mouth gone dry. That wasn't the creak of old wood, not the sigh of an abandoned structure settling into itself. That was movement. Deliberate. Immediate. My skin prickled with a cold sweat, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the door frame where the wood near the handle looked splintered, like someone had tried to force it open from either side. No footsteps followed. No voice came from within, but I could feel it. Something had changed in that house. I wasn't just looking at a ruin anymore. I was standing in front of something awake. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, but my legs didn't move. I just stood there, pulse hammering, trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that it could have been a beam collapsing, a loose board giving way. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The noise had weight to it, intention, like it had been waiting for someone to get close. My chest tightened. The air felt thin, and I became painfully aware of how alone I was. No signal, no backup, just me and this place that didn't want to be seen. I forced myself to back away slowly, refusing to turn my back completely, as if whatever was inside would reach out the moment I lost sight of the doorway. Nothing moved. Yet the feeling of being watched only intensified. The windows, opaque with years of dirt, looked darker now, less like barriers and more like eyes. As I took one final step away, a sudden sharp squeak rang out from inside, fast, high, like a nail dragged across a board, and it sent an electric jolt through my chest. I nearly dropped the camera. My breath caught. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I walked as calmly as I could manage, heart pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. And even as I put distance between myself and that house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted behind those walls, and that it had marked me the moment I looked inside. As I moved farther down the street, trying to shift my focus, back to the camera, back to the work, my eyes kept darting to that wooden house, each step away feeling more like retreat than progress. Then I saw it. A faint motion from the side window, where the curtain hung crooked, dust-caked, and faded. It shifted just slightly, enough to catch the light in a way it hadn't before. I stopped in my tracks, heart jolting. I stared at it, breath held, waiting for the movement to repeat, for a silhouette to take shape behind the glass, for anything to confirm I hadn't imagined it. But the curtain hung still again, limp and lifeless, as before. Maybe a breeze, I told myself, though I hadn't felt even the softest wind all day. The silence was too complete for that. I kept moving, faster now, the camera slapping lightly against my chest with each step. The dusty gravel crunched beneath my boots, and every sound I made seemed to echo too loudly off the empty buildings. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow, like I'd been holding in panic too long and it was starting to leak through the cracks. When I reached my car, I fumbled the keys, fingers clumsy, and practically threw myself into the driver's seat, locking the doors the moment they shut. I gripped the wheel with both hands, just breathing, trying to steady myself, but my heart thumped with stubborn urgency. The village still sat silent around me, unmoving, unchanged, yet somehow hostile now. I started the engine and eased the car onto the narrow road, glancing back once, just to be sure I wasn't leaving anything or anyone behind. That's when I saw it, or thought I did. In the rearview mirror, just past the edge of a house, something shifted. A flicker of movement, too fast to catch in detail, but slow enough to register as deliberate. I turned my head, scanning the street through the back window, but there was only stillness. Empty houses, slanted roofs, cracked windows. I told myself it had to be a curtain or a shutter caught in a breeze I never felt. But the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. If anything, it pulled tighter. The deeper I drove into daylight, the further I put that place behind me, the more I felt it hadn't let me go. That something unseen still trailed me just out of view, just beyond the mirror's edge. And even now, I don't know if what I saw was real, or if the village had simply reached out and left something behind in me. That night, sleep refused to come easy. I lay in the stiff bed, eyes fixed to the ceiling, as the hours crept by in silence. But even when I finally drifted off, I found no rest. My dreams were fractured and dark, filled with the sounds I had tried so hard to forget. The crunch of gravel behind me, the long, aching squeal of warped floorboards under unseen weight, and the suffocating presence of something that lingered just out of sight. Shadows crept along the walls in my sleep, bending in ways they shouldn't, stretching across rooms I didn't recognize, but somehow knew. I woke again and again, heart racing, shirt damp with sweat, unsure whether I had actually heard those sounds or simply carried them with me from that cursed village. Every creak of the inn's old pipes felt too close, too familiar. By dawn, I was hollowed out, nerves raw, but something in me insisted on going back. One final time. I told myself it was to finish the job, to capture the last few shots, and walk away for good. But a deeper part of me needed to see it again, to confirm it was real. The sky had turned gray when I stepped outside, clouds heavy and unmoving, casting a cold, dead light over everything. The air bit at my skin in a way it hadn't before. Sharp, metallic. And as I drove toward the village, it felt like the world was holding its breath again. When I arrived, the buildings looked worse than they had the day before, somehow more decayed, as if the night had gnawed on them while no one watched. The wood sagged deeper, the paint seemed duller, and the windows darker, like the glass had thickened with rot. The silence felt heavier than before, and the cold wasn't just in the air anymore. It had seeped into my bones. I stepped out of the car and immediately felt it again. That sensation of being watched. Not from one direction, but from all of them at once, like the village itself had turned its full attention on me. I raised my camera, hands already trembling, and told myself this would be quick. Just a few more photos and then I would leave. But even as I clicked the shutter, even as I lined up the shots, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed since yesterday. That whatever lived in the silence was closer now, more aware, more curious. And I began to wonder if I had come back by choice, or if I had been expected. I moved through the village one last time, camera in hand, telling myself I was just tying up loose ends, capturing the final shots, finishing what I started. But every step felt like a trespass. Every shutter clicked like a violation. The air was colder than before, damp and weighty, clinging to my skin like a warning. The buildings leaned inward, darker under the gray sky, and the silence was no longer just eerie. It was expectant. I avoided the wooden house at first, working my way through other angles, documenting collapsed porches, peeling paint, rusted fences, but I couldn't ignore the pull. Eventually, I turned toward it again, standing across the road, lining up the frame to shoot from a distance. The lens trembled slightly in my grip, but I held it steady, focusing on the texture of the wood, the warped windows that seemed even more clouded than before. And then it happened. Clear as day this time. A long, groaning creak echoed from within the house, sharp and deliberate. Like weight shifting on an old board, my whole body tensed. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. The sound hung in the air like a question, daring me to step closer, to look through the glass, to acknowledge that whatever was inside wasn't finished with me. But I couldn't do it. I didn't want to know what made that sound. I didn't want to see what might be waiting in the dark beyond the door. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my teeth, and suddenly the cold wasn't just in the air, it was in me. I lowered the camera and stepped back, each movement stiff, mechanical, like my body was acting before my mind could even form the decision. No one came out, no voices called, but the feeling that I had been seen, known, followed, it was suffocating. I didn't run, but every part of me wanted to. I turned and walked, fast and unsteady, gravel crunching beneath my boots, vision narrowing, breath coming in short, shallow bursts. I didn't look back. I didn't want to risk seeing anything in the windows. When I reached the car, I barely registered unlocking the doors before sliding in and starting the engine with trembling hands. I didn't check my mirrors. I didn't wait. I drove away with the kind of certainty you don't argue with. And even now, I know I made the right choice. Whatever was in that house, in that village, it didn't want me to leave with just photographs. It wanted to be remembered, or worse, it wanted to be followed. I didn't look back for long as I drove away from that village. The road ahead winding and empty, the rear-view mirror offering nothing but stillness. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stared too long, I might catch something shifting in the distance, something that didn't want to be seen leaving its home. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the skin cold and damp. And though I was miles away within an hour, the weight of the place lingered like fiend on my chest. It wasn't just fear, it was something heavier, something that stuck to the ribs, even with daylight creeping through the windshield. Even with the hum of the engine beneath me, I couldn't silence the echo of those sounds. The crunch of gravel too perfectly timed with my own steps. The slow ache of floorboards giving underweight that wasn't mine. The absence of any wind or bird or life. That silence, it hadn't been empty. It had been full. Watching, listening, holding something back. When I got back to the inn, I didn't unpack. I didn't rest. I uploaded the photos to my hard drive like I always do, but I didn't sort them. I didn't touch them. For days they just sat in a folder, untouched, unshared. And when I finally worked up the nerve to flip through them, my chest tightened all over again. Frame after frame of old buildings, broken signs, sagging roofs, and dust-choked windows. Nothing obviously strange, no dark figures in the corners or faces behind the glass. But the feeling came back anyway. That prickling unease, that slow crawl of something standing just out of frame, wasn't what was captured in the photos that haunted me. It was what wasn't. The knowledge that something had been there, just beyond the lens, just beyond my reach. I never posted those pictures. I never told anyone about the trip. Not really. What would I even say? That an abandoned village had looked at me and decided I shouldn't forget it? That silence can follow you like a voice you never heard. I kept the folder though. I've opened it a few times over the years, usually late at night when I can't sleep, when I think maybe I imagined the whole thing. But every time I scroll through those images, my stomach knots and my eyes linger too long on the windows, waiting for movement. And each time, I remember the way the air felt on my skin, the way my instincts screamed while logic whispered. Some part of me knows I was never alone in that place. Some part of me believes that Village is still watching, that it was alive the entire time, and that maybe, just maybe, it still is. Story 6. I didn't think twice when Eric asked me to house sit for him. 2 quiet weeks in a comfortable place sounded like a break I didn't know I needed. He handed me the keys, walked me through the basics of his security system, showed me how to arm and disarm it, and gave me full permission to make myself at home. The house itself was simple. 2 stories, tucked on a quiet street with neighbors spaced just far enough to forget they existed. There was a sparse yard, a couple of trees that barely moved in the breeze, and a stillness that felt almost too perfect. Eric didn't seem concerned about anything. He just smiled and told me to enjoy myself, thanked me for the favor like it was no big deal. He even pointed out the guest room upstairs where I'd be staying, told me to help myself to anything in the fridge. It all felt normal, pleasant even. The first few days passed without incident. I'd wake up, eat cereal while scrolling my phone, head to work, and come back in the evenings to unwind. Locked the place up at night, watched mindless TV, played a few games, and fell asleep easily. No creaking floors, no flickering lights, no weird shadows or feelings of being watched. The house was quiet in a way that made you feel safe, like nothing could ever really go wrong there. I'd even started to wonder why Eric felt the need for a house sitter at all. Nothing about the place suggested it required attention. I told myself it was just about peace of mind, or maybe he'd had a break-in scare in the past. Whatever the reason, I didn't mind. It was easy money, and easier still because I never felt like I was truly alone, just in a quiet pocket of the world, surrounded by clean walls and predictable routines. I had no reason to be suspicious, no reason to sense what was coming, no hint that something beneath that still surface had been waiting for nightfall. It started on the 5th night, sometime after 2 a.m., when the world outside had gone silent and the house had settled into its usual stillness. Too still, in hindsight. I was drifting between sleep and wakefulness, that hazy middle ground where sounds don't quite register as real, when I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, slow, like someone walking barefoot across the upstairs hallway, just outside my door. At first I told myself it was nothing. Old houses creak. Wood shifts with the temperature. Maybe a pipe knocking in the walls. But this wasn't that. The rhythm was too steady, too human. Step. Pause. Step. My body froze as I strained to listen, heart knocking against my ribs like it was trying to break free. The steps moved from one end of the hall to the other, stopped, then resumed. I sat up in bed, palms sweating, telling myself I was overreacting. I reached for my phone and used its weak light to guide me to the door. When I unlocked it and peeked into the hallway, there was nothing. No movement, no shadow slipping away, no sound except the low hum of the air conditioner. I whispered a tentative "hello" into the dark, and the silence that answered felt heavy, like it was waiting. I stood there too long, watching the hallway as if it might change shape before my eyes, then retreated back to the guest room and locked the door behind me, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I didn't sleep well. The sixth night, the pattern repeated itself. Same time, same measured footsteps, the same paralyzing fear sinking its claws into my spine. Only this time I didn't move. I stayed in bed, eyes open in the dark, listening as the steps went back and forth like someone pacing as if waiting for something or someone to open the door. My skin prickled under the blanket and every muscle in my body begged me not to move. Eventually the steps faded and I lay there long enough to forget when I finally drifted off. By the seventh night, I was on edge before the sun even went down. I locked every window, double-checked the security system, and left lights on in the hallway. But none of that mattered when the alarm exploded into sound at 1:07 a.m. A blaring, heart-stopping wail that jolted me from bed and into a sprint. I threw on whatever clothes I could grab and ran downstairs to the panel near the door. It said internal motion detected, meaning something had moved inside the house. Not a door or a window, something inside. I disarmed it with shaking fingers and stood there, stunned, before forcing myself to sweep through the ground floor. Every room was silent. The kitchen was untouched, the study empty, living room undisturbed. I checked the locks, all intact, no signs of forced entry. I went back upstairs, checked the bedrooms. Nothing. Nothing except the air, which felt colder than it had any right to be. I was too shaken to sleep, so I stayed up in the living room with every light on, eyes darting toward shadows that didn't move, ears catching every soft creak like a threat. And when 3 a.m. rolled around, I walked up to the hallway again. I don't know why. I guess I needed to prove something to myself. That's when I felt it, the cold. Not just a draft, not just a drop in temperature, an unnatural chill that hit me like a wall the second I stepped into the corridor. My skin erupted in goosebumps, and when I exhaled, I saw my breath hang in the air. It made no sense. The thermostat downstairs read 75 degrees F, and the rest of the house felt normal. But that hallway? It was like standing in front of an open freezer. The cold was too focused, too specific. I went back down, checked the AC, everything functioning fine, but that spot upstairs never changed. Over the next several nights, the footsteps returned, always around 2 or 3 a.m., always slow, unhurried, like whoever or whatever was walking had nowhere else to be. I stopped checking. The fear had settled into my bones by then, dull but constant, like a headache that never fully goes away. I started leaving the hallway lights on every night, hoping it might chase something away, or at least give me the illusion of control, but the lights didn't help. The steps still came. The cold was always waiting. My routine became a spiral of anxiety. I'd eat dinner, pretend to relax, then retreat to the guest room, lock the door, and try to drown out the sounds with whatever show I could find. Sometimes I passed out from sheer exhaustion. Sometimes I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, waiting for the sound I knew was coming. The sleep deprivation started to wear me down. I was snapping at people at work, forgetting small things, constantly checking over my shoulder like someone was following me even in daylight. And every night, the dread returned. crawling up my spine as the clock crept past midnight. I started imagining things, shapes in mirrors, whispers behind doors, my name barely audible under the hum of the AC. But the worst part was how the house never offered an answer. No open doors, no signs of intrusion, just sounds and sensations, and a silence that seemed to pulse with something hidden. I began to question myself. Maybe I was unraveling. Maybe it was just stress or sleep paralysis, or my mind amplifying nothing into terror. But that hallway, that cold, that persistent, deliberate tread of footsteps, I didn't imagine those. And I still had nights left before Eric came home. Nights to endure, nights to listen, nights to wonder what would happen if one day the footsteps stopped just outside my door and didn't leave. I woke up with a jolt sometime around 2 a.m., drenched in a cold sweat, my heart already pounding before I could even open my eyes. The air in the room felt too still, too heavy, like something was pressing down on everything at once. I sat up slowly, throat dry, every inch of my skin crawling with that primal sense of dread you can't reason away. I didn't hear the footsteps this time. What I heard instead was a soft, deliberate click. The unmistakable sound of a door latch releasing. My door. The one I'd locked before bed, the same way I'd done every night since things started getting strange. I held my breath, staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that the noise came from somewhere else. But then came the creak. Slow, drawn out, like someone was easing the door open inch by inch. My eyes adjusted just enough to catch the sliver of hallway light widening in front of me, the outline of the door shifting open ever so slightly. Not enough to see who or what might be there, just enough to know it had moved. I felt a pressure in my chest, sharp and pulsing, as if my own body was warning me to run. I reached for the lamp on the nightstand with a trembling hand and flicked it on. The hallway lay empty, stretching out in both directions, still and silent. But the cold, it hit me like a wave, unnatural and immediate, as if I'd opened a freezer door and stepped inside. My breath fogged in the air, and the hair on my arms stood up. There was no breeze, no vent nearby. No earthly reason for that kind of cold to exist inside a sealed house with the thermostat set to 75. I stepped to the doorway, trying to convince myself it could still be something rational, even as every instinct I had screamed otherwise. That's when I heard it, a faint, shuffling sound, soft but distinct, like a foot dragging across the floor or nails scratching lightly against the wood. It was distant, but there, buried beneath the silence, a sound not meant to belong. I didn't wait to find out what was making it. I turned back into the room, grabbed my duffel bag, and shoved everything I owned inside in a flurry of panic. I wasn't thinking clearly, just moving, fast, chaotic, trying to leave before something made itself known. My chest felt tight, breath coming in short bursts, and I didn't even bother folding clothes or checking drawers. I zipped the bag, killed the lamp, and stepped into the hallway, cold air gripping me like invisible hands. Nothing moved, but every shadow felt closer than it had before. I kept my eyes forward, not daring to glance back as I moved quickly down the stairs, gripped the banister like it was my last tether to safety. I disarmed the alarm, fumbled with the lock. And the second I stepped outside, the warm night wrapped around me like a blanket. The contrast was jarring, almost surreal. I didn't stop to think, didn't look back at the house. I got in the car, turned the key with shaking fingers, and drove away. The rear view mirror reflecting nothing but darkness behind me. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched me go. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't the first time it had stood in that hallway, waiting for someone to open the door. Back at my own apartment, everything felt smaller, more cramped, but also inexplicably safer. As if I'd crossed some invisible threshold back into a world that still followed the rules. I locked the door behind me, stood in the dim glow of my kitchen light for a long while, and just listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no cold air creeping along the floor, no weight pressing in from the hallway, just silence, the kind that actually lets you breathe. I don't remember falling asleep, only that I finally did. When Eric got back the next afternoon, I met him at his place to return the key. He looked relaxed, a little sunburnt, in a good mood, like someone who'd had the kind of vacation you hope never ends. I didn't want to ruin that. I told him the basics. The alarm went off one night, probably a false trigger, and I'd heard some strange sounds here and there. Nothing serious. He just nodded and shrugged, saying the motion sensor had acted up before, like it was no surprise. I didn't mention the footsteps, the cold spot, or the door that opened on its own while I watched it in the dark. I didn't tell him how close I came to losing it that last night, or how I'd packed in a blind panic, with the kind of dread I couldn't explain even to myself. I just handed him the key, said the house was fine, and waved off the money he tried to offer. I didn't want anything that might tie me to that place again. Even now, I find myself going back over it in my head, replaying those sounds, that freezing air, the slow turn of the doorknob. I've tried coming up with explanations. Maybe the sensor was faulty. Maybe the hallway draft came from some vent I didn't notice. Maybe sleep deprivation twisted harmless noises into terror. But deep down, I know what I felt. The weight of the silence, the unnatural cold, the presence, something not seen, but unmistakably there. And no matter how much I try to rationalize it, that door did open. That hallway was ice cold, and something was walking up and down outside my room, night after night, with footsteps that didn't belong. I never told Eric everything. Maybe I didn't want him to think I'd lost it. Or maybe I didn't want to plant that seed in his mind, didn't want him to lie awake at night wondering if the steps had returned. As for me, if he ever asks again, I'll have an excuse ready. I won't go back. Some things aren't worth curiosity. Some houses, no matter how quiet they seem, keep their own company when the lights go out. Story 7. The engine coughed once, twice, then gave out with the kind of finality that didn't feel mechanical but alive, like the last breath of something trying to hang on. In an instant, the low rumble that had been my only company for hours vanished, leaving behind a silence so deep it rang in my ears. I coasted to a halt on the cracked blacktop of Clinton Road, its asphalt dissolving into darkness just beyond the reach of my headlight, which now barely managed to carve out a sickly cone of pale light. My boots touched gravel, the crunch impossibly loud. I swung the kickstand down, helmet off, and immediately regretted it. The air slapped me in the face, cold and wet with decay. threaded through with something metallic that turned my stomach. I was about to pull my jacket tighter when I saw it, a red phone booth, just standing there, maybe 20 feet from the road's edge, soaked in the spillover glow from my dying headlight. The color, too vivid, looked freshly painted, almost wet, though the night held no rain, and the surrounding brush hadn't been disturbed at all. It didn't belong here. No signage, no logos, no rates or instructions. Just red metal and glass, too clean, too deliberate. No wires connected it to anything. No poles nearby. Just that still, looming presence. Like it had dropped itself into the clearing moments before I arrived. I stood frozen for a long time, every instinct screaming something wasn't right, but the silence, it pressed in, made my thoughts feel like echoes. I reached for my phone. One bar, then none. Emergency calls only. Clinton Road was notorious for bad reception, sure, but this felt personal, like the road itself had sealed me off. Then a sound. A piercing electronic trill that shattered the stillness. The phone was ringing. Wasn't the tone that chilled me, but the rhythm, precise, like it was counting. Each ring stretched a little longer than it should have, bleeding into the quiet like it didn't want to end. My feet moved before I even realized it. The gravel shifted underfoot. The booth loomed closer. I gripped the door's handle. It was warm, too warm. The door groaned like old bones as I pulled it open. Inside, the smell hit me. Copper and ozone, sharp and clean and wrong, like electricity right before a lightning strike. The handset trembled slightly in its cradle, as if eager. I lifted it to my ear. No dial tone, just static. But underneath it, something else, not sound exactly. More like breath, or words that hadn't fully formed. I stood there, frozen, listening as something on the other end tried to shape itself into speech. The night around me didn't just feel quiet. It felt paused, like the world was holding its breath, waiting. The booth's walls radiated warmth that soaked into my jacket, then my skin. I tried to pull back but couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew what it wanted. And somewhere beneath the rising static, I thought I heard it whisper my name. The phone began to ring. Sharp, precise, mechanical, but not normal. Not here. Not in the middle of nowhere with no wires, no poles, no signs that this booth even belonged to any functioning system. The sound sliced through the stillness like it had been waiting for me. I hesitated, heart thudding unevenly in my chest, then reached out with a hand that didn't feel entirely like mine and pushed open the booth's door. The hinges groaned as if they hadn't moved in years, though the red paint looked fresh and the glass sparkled without a single smudge. The air inside was warmer than outside, stifling and oddly sterile, thick with the acrid scent of metal and ozone like something had just finished burning. I lifted the receiver, half expecting silence, half hoping for it, but instead, I was greeted by static. Not the white noise of an empty line, but something deeper, more textured, like breath, labored, rhythmic, ancient. I held my breath. It wasn't just sound, it was presence. Then came a voice, or at least the shape of one, buried beneath layers of electrical snow. Words didn't form exactly, but I understood them just the same. Look at the speedometer. The whisper crawled into my head, bypassing ears, vibrating directly against something inside me. I turned my eyes toward the motorcycle, still idling in its grave of shadows, its dashboard faintly glowing in the dying reach of my headlight. The speedometer was still, needle unmoving, but the odometer? That was different. I knew the number by heart. 47,482 miles. I'd checked it just hours ago, obsessed as I was with tracking each journey. But now it read 47,281. I blinked hard. That couldn't be right. Odometers don't go backwards. It was against everything mechanical, logical, real. My first thought was a glitch, maybe a loose wire, maybe the battery was shorting out. But no. The digits were firm, steady, glowing with unnatural calm. I turned back to the phone, clutched the handset tighter. The static pulsed, like it was breathing with me. Look again, it urged. Though again the words never fully formed, just hinted and pressed like fingers on the back of my skull. I looked. 47,480. Another mile vanished. The cold sweat broke across my neck, soaking into the collar of my jacket. My breath fogged the glass, and for a moment I saw my reflection warped, distorted, eyes wide with the slow realization that something had shifted, not just around me, but inside me. I squeezed my eyes shut, opened them again. Where's 99? The miles were peeling away one at a time, each vanishing inch, slicing away something more than just distance. The phone crackled again, softer this time, intimate, almost playful, as if it knew I was finally listening. I pressed the receiver tighter to my ear, desperate to understand, but the words refused to settle. Always on the edge of meaning, always almost real. The numbers on the dashboard glowed like a countdown I hadn't meant to start. And outside the booth, the shadows felt closer than before. Watching. Waiting. I kept my gaze locked on the glowing numbers of the odometer, 47,479, willing them to stay still, to obey the laws of reality that had always governed the world. I thought I understood. But the moment my attention wavered, just the briefest glance toward the shifting shadows beyond the headlights' dying reach, the numbers changed. 4078. My heart dropped. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't a trick of the eye. It was happening, and it was deliberate. The rules no longer applied here. The darkness around me had thickened, not simply as an absence of light, but as a presence, sentient, watching, almost breathing. I could feel it, pressing in at the edges of the light, testing its limits, waiting for them to fail. Even the headlight, once steady and sharp, had begun to flicker, as though struggling to hold the darkness back. The booth behind me glowed faintly red, like a pulse, and the air had grown heavy, damp with something more than humidity, something like intent. I turned my focus back to the odometer. 47,477. Another mile vanished. My stomach clenched. I began to understand. It only moved when I wasn't watching. My gaze had become the only thing tethering the numbers to reality. Every blink, every distraction, every flicker of doubt was a permission slip for the countdown to continue. I tried to stay focused, but the pressure was building, behind my eyes, inside my chest, as if some invisible weight was pushing down on me the longer I resisted. Then came the footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. Not crunching leaves or snapping twigs. No, these were sharp, distinct, like dress shoes clicking against pavement. They circled the booth, each step evenly spaced, methodical, like something that had waited a long time and knew it didn't need to rush. My breath hitched. I turned my head slightly, just enough to listen, just enough to lose sight of the odometer. And when I looked back, 47,976. I wanted to scream. Instead, I locked my eyes back on the numbers, refusing to blink, feeling tears pool from the strain. But the sound of the footsteps continued, closer now. Each one precise, as if rehearsed. The hairs on my arms stood up. The darkness didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was full of things just beyond perception, leaning in, just waiting for me to look away again. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. Shapes that weren't human, weren't animal, weren't anything I had words for. They moved like smoke given purpose. My muscles tensed, jaw clenched tight, heart pounding like a second pulse in my ears. I wanted to run, to move, to scream into the nothingness, but I couldn't. Because if I looked away, even for a breath, another mile would disappear. And something told me that when that count reached 0, it wouldn't just be the numbers that were gone, it would be me. The static deepened, not louder exactly, but denser, thicker, like fog you could drown in. It no longer came just from the phone pressed to my ear, but from the walls of the booth itself, from the air, from somewhere behind my eyes. At first it was just noise, but the longer I stood there, the more I began to hear beneath it. Patterns, shapes of sound, fragments of conversations I thought I'd forgotten. My voice, years younger, laughing, making promises I never kept, talking to people who had long since drifted out of my life or vanished altogether. The static pulsed like a living thing, wrapping itself around my thoughts, luring them away from the present. The booth's warmth had turned oppressive now, pressing in from every direction as though I were inside something breathing, something awake. I tried to pull the phone away from my ear, but my arm wouldn't move. My body no longer felt like it belonged to me. It was an echo, something remembered by whatever intelligence was speaking through the line. Then, through the distortion, I heard it. A voice clearer than any before, buried just beneath the static like a fossil in ice. It was my own voice. Not as it sounded now, but how it had been years ago, hopeful, unburdened, naive. "How far have you really traveled?" it asked. And the words didn't sound like a question. They felt like a measurement, like scales tipping towards something I wasn't ready to face. I wanted to scream that I'd gone miles, countless miles, ridden through cities and forests and lonely stretches of highway, burned through tank after tank of gas, chasing peace or escape or something I could never quite name. But I couldn't say anything. My throat was dry, clenched tight, like the air itself refused to let me speak. The question hung there, vibrating in my skull, a riddle with no answer that I wanted to give. Because deep down, I was starting to understand. This wasn't about physical distance. The odometer wasn't tracking where my tires had taken me. It was counting something else, something I'd shed along the way. Memories, maybe, choices, time, identity. Each mile lost wasn't a measurement of road. It was a mile stripped from my past, peeled from my story. I looked again at the glowing numbers through the glass, and they shimmered like heat mirages. 47,472. The digits blurred and wavered, as if they weren't quite real anymore. As if they were being rewritten every second I stood there. My legs trembled beneath me. The voice in the static, my voice, spoke again, softer this time, almost tender. Every journey leaves something behind. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from fear, not entirely, but from the quiet, inescapable knowing that I hadn't been traveling to anywhere. I'd been traveling away. And whatever was on the other end of this line, it knew. It had always known. The numbers were falling faster now, no longer in steady, measured increments, but tumbling as though pulled by some unseen gravity. 47,012. Then 46,991, slipping downward like sand through an hourglass. I couldn't stop. I no longer pretended it was a malfunction or some surreal dream. I knew, deep in the pit of my stomach, that this was real, that the odometer wasn't counting distance traveled, but distance remaining. And whatever it was counting toward, it was closing in. The cold had changed. Wasn't just physical anymore. It was existential, a hollowing from the inside out, as though parts of me were being erased with every mile I lost. The light from my motorcycle sputtered, dimmed, and the edges of the world began to blur, like a candle in a room too large to warm. When I looked at the booth, its red walls now glowed with a deep inner light, throbbing faintly like a heartbeat. And behind the glass, I thought I saw movement. Shadows bent over something, shifting in time with the static that now filled the air like fog. The odometer read 45,905. My chest felt tight. My legs had gone numb. The thought came unbidden. What happens at zero? I didn't want to know. But I couldn't stop watching, couldn't look away. Somewhere behind me, footsteps resumed. Closer this time, slower, heavier, like something was savoring the final stretch. My body refused to turn around. My focus tunneled to the digits, my breathing shallow, my heart no longer beating in rhythm with anything I recognized as human. The booth rang again, sharp and sudden, slicing through the dark like a blade across glass. I didn't move. I couldn't. I knew if I stepped inside again, I wouldn't come back out. The odometer glitched for a moment, flickering and then settled. The light died. First the bike, then the headlight, then the glow from the booth. I was swallowed whole by silence and dark, a void so complete it felt alive. And then the final sound, the slow creak of the booth's door opening behind me, followed by a soft click as it closed. The footsteps returned, right behind me now. Deliberate, patient. A breath brushed the back of my neck. I wanted to scream, but the sound never came. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere left to go. And yet, morning might come. Someone might drive past this place and see a motorcycle on the shoulder of Clinton Road, headlight shattered, engine cold, odometer blank. Or maybe they won't. Maybe there'll be nothing there at all. Maybe the booth will wait a little longer, humming quietly, in a frequency just beyond hearing, ringing for the next traveler who thinks they're just passing through. The line will connect. The static will whisper, and the numbers will begin to count down again. Because some journeys never truly start, and some roads never truly end. They say that sometimes, late at night, when the air turns heavy and the static on your phone crackles just a little too long, you can hear voices. Not the usual digital glitch, but something older, slower, more deliberate. A whisper crawling through the static, like it remembers you. They say it happens on roads that don't appear on maps, places where time doesn't behave, and the horizon never gets any closer. Clinton Road is one of them. If you've ever taken it deep enough into the dark, you might have felt it. That subtle pressure, like someone riding just behind you, like headlights that never quite catch up. They say there's a booth out there. A red one. No wires, no markings. No logical reason for it to exist. But it does. It waits. And when it rings, it doesn't stop until you answer. No one remembers exactly what happens after that. Maybe that's part of the design. You think you're just making a call, but somehow you're the one being dialed. The line connects, and suddenly you're not where you were before. You're somewhere in between, somewhere off course but eerily familiar. And the numbers, those cursed numbers, they start counting down. It's not just miles, it's time, it's memory, it's you. Every turn of the wheel, every breath you take on that stretch of road, it all pulls you backward. Towards something you forgot, or maybe something you were trying to outrun. They say no one ever remembers arriving at the end. But something always changes when the odometer hits 0. Not just for the traveler, but for anyone who listens too closely, who lets the story seep into the quiet spaces in their mind. Because the journey isn't just theirs, it's yours now too. So if you find yourself driving alone and the signal dies and the static whispers a name that sounds like yours, don't answer. Or do. Just know that once the numbers start moving backward, they never stop. And when the booth rings again, and it will, it's not just a call. It's an invitation. One way. Irrevocable. Waiting only for someone curious enough, reckless enough, or lost enough to follow the sound. You think you'll know when you get there, but you won't. You'll only realize when it's far too late and the only thing left in front of you is the end. Story 8. I remember the first time I stepped into that basement. It hit me like a wall. The air was damp and stale, thick with the sour blend of wet concrete, old paper, and decaying cardboard. It clung to my clothes, seeped into my skin, and settled into the back of my throat. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered in a slow, sick rhythm, casting long, shaky shadows along the rows of archive shelves that rose like tombstones from the concrete floor. The ceiling was low, and everything about the space felt compressed, as if the building itself was trying to press me down into the ground. I didn't complain. I was new. Just a few weeks into my job at the publishing house, Weikichi, and they needed someone for the night shift. I needed the money, no questions asked. The instructions were simple: monitor incoming deliveries, update inventory logs, check the shelves. It sounded easy, almost too easy. At first, the silence unnerved me. The isolation scraped against something deep inside, something that doesn't like to be left alone with itself. I'd hear the sudden, sharp clank of expanding pipes echo off the concrete, or the distant rattle of the ventilation system, and my heart would jolt before I could remind myself that basements make noise, that this was normal. And over time I adapted. I got used to the rhythmic creaks and groans of the building settling, to the unpredictable knocks and dull thuds that came from nowhere and went nowhere. I learned how to ignore the sensation of being watched, of something unseen just beyond the range of my flashlight waiting behind the shelves. I told myself it was just nerves, just fatigue from the long hours and stale air. But something about that place never felt right. Even in the middle of summer, the basement stayed frigid, as if the sun had long since given up trying to touch it. Each step echoed too long, each shadow lingered too heavy, and though I kept my eyes on the checklist and my ears tuned to the expected sounds of a working building, I couldn't shake the feeling that the silence down there wasn't empty. It was listening, watching, holding its breath, waiting. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice began to whisper that I hadn't stepped into a quiet workspace at all. I had stepped into something else, something waiting, something that had been there long before me and would still be there long after. It happened on a Tuesday night, sometime after 2 a.m, when I was assigned to inventory the old boxes in the far corridor, the section of the basement nobody ever bothered with unless they had to. That part of the archive felt different, even on normal nights, narrower, darker, with shelves that seemed to lean just slightly inward like they were listening. The flickering overhead bulb buzzed louder than usual, almost agitated. I was scribbling down box numbers when I heard it, a soft, breathy hiss just behind me. I froze, my pen halting mid-stroke, heart lurching into my throat. It wasn't the usual groan of the building or a trick of the pipes. It was too intentional. I turned, flashlight in hand, and swept the beam across the dusty shelves. Nothing. Just rows of sealed boxes and the faint echo of my own breath. I stood still, listening. The whisper came again, barely audible, like a voice pressed up against glass. My skin prickled. I took a step forward, and the sound moved, retreating ahead of me. Another step and it shifted again, always just out of reach. My mouth went dry. I wasn't sure whether to call out or stay silent. Eventually I whispered, "Hello?" But my voice barely made a dent in the thick, humming air. No response. Only the persistent buzz from the light above and the sudden awareness of how far I was from the rest of the building. I tried to shake it off, blaming air vents or a loose pipe, but my body didn't believe me. My hands were trembling, and there was this tightness in my chest, like the walls were inching closer. I turned back toward my desk, trying to act normal, when I heard the elevator ding echo through the basement. The sound hit like a jolt. I hadn't called it. Nobody else was scheduled that night. I rushed toward it, hoping it was a late delivery or someone from security, but the corridor was empty. The elevator doors stood open, unmoving, waiting. Its interior light glowed faintly, and there were no footprints on the floor, no sound of retreating steps, just that same cold hum and the unmistakable feeling that someone had just left before I got there. The nights that followed only got worse, quieter in the wrong way, like the basement was holding its breath. The first time I heard it, I was shelving a batch of returned manuscripts near the older archives when the sound came from behind the far shelves. Slow, deliberate footsteps, one after another, dragging just slightly like someone was wearing heavy boots on a wet floor. I stopped, my breath catching mid-inhale, and turned toward the noise. But it was already gone, replaced by the usual humming of the light fixtures above. The next night, it was the sound of something being dragged across the floor, low and gritty, as if a box was being pulled by hand across the concrete. I walked the length of the aisles and found nothing. No open boxes, no displaced items, just everything in its place, undisturbed. But the sound had been real. Then came the scratching, not loud but persistent, like nails slowly dragging along wood or concrete, too rhythmic to be random. It would start when I was deep in the rows with my back turned and stop the moment I looked up. I tried brushing it off, told myself it was probably rats or some mechanical glitch, but my body reacted before my brain could lie to it. My hands were clammy, my heart pounding faster with every shift. I started to flinch at ordinary sounds, watching the shadows more than the shelves. Then one night, I noticed something on the floor near the far end of the basement, a single dark smear, maybe 3 feet long, just off center from the aisle. I crouched to look closer. It was sticky to the touch, not quite oil, not quite anything I recognized. It didn't have a scent, which somehow made it worse. The smear trailed toward the back wall and then stopped, like something had either appeared or disappeared there. I searched for more signs, checked for leaks or anything the maintenance crew might have left behind, but there was nothing. Just that one fresh mark, gleaming faintly under the beam of my flashlight. And that feeling, like I was being watched through the shelves, from somewhere too still, too quiet. I stood there far too long, listening, heart in my throat, waiting for the next sound to find me. It didn't take long before my body began reacting before my mind could catch up. My heart would hammer at the slightest creak. My palms would sweat just stepping off the elevator. And I felt a wave of dread each time I had to pass through that narrow corridor at the far end of the basement. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was like something inside me had started bracing for impact the moment I walked through those doors. The shadows felt thicker in that part of the building, the air colder, heavier. I'd pause before turning corners, listening, waiting, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. But each night, that feeling grew harder to ignore. I'd walk faster through the aisles without meaning to, my flashlight clutched tight, eyes darting to the edges of my vision where nothing ever moved. and yet I swore I wasn't alone. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I told myself I needed to be sure that I was going to inspect every corner, every row, every inch of the basement so I could finally put these thoughts to rest. I retrieved the industrial flashlight from the storage room, the one with the brighter beam, and began my search. The concrete echoed my every step, my boots damp against the floor, and I tried to drown out the rising anxiety with the sound of my own breathing. I scanned the boxes, the shelves, the walls. Nothing seemed out of place. The familiar smell of mold and paper clung to the air. And then, near the end of the corridor, I found it again, that sticky smear on the floor, only a few feet long, but fresh, dark, unidentifiable. As I knelt to look closer, I heard a single footstep behind me. Just one. No breath. No shuffle. Just one distinct press of weight onto concrete, as if someone had only just arrived. I didn't move at first. I couldn't. My whole body locked up, every muscle stiff with tension. When I finally turned around, the corridor was empty. The shelves stood in their same silent rows, and the shadows stretched without interruption. But I couldn't shake the pressure in the air behind me, the creeping certainty that something had been standing there and chose not to be seen. It was just past midnight when a delivery came through. An unusual time, but not unheard of for our schedule. I met the driver by the loading dock, grateful for the break in silence and the presence of another human being. He was tall, bundled in a heavy jacket despite the lingering summer heat outside, and his eyes looked as tired as mine felt. We made small talk as we unloaded a few boxes of manuscript archives, his voice echoing softly in the concrete space as we wheeled them through the freight elevator and into the storage floor. The moment the doors opened to that familiar chill, I saw him pause just slightly, like something brushed against his instincts. As we settled the boxes near my desk, he glanced around the rows of shelves and said, "You work down here alone at night?" I nodded. "Every night," I replied, trying to sound casual. He gave a low whistle and shook his head. "Man, this place gives me the creeps." He didn't linger after that, just offered a nod and disappeared back into the elevator, leaving only silence behind. And it was strange how quickly the temperature seemed to drop once he was gone, as if the basement had been holding its breath and finally exhaled something cold and unseen. I stood still for a moment, listening. That unnatural stillness was back. The kind where even the hum of the lights felt too quiet, too restrained. I returned to my desk, trying to bury myself in the simple comfort of paperwork, filing, cataloging. But the sounds returned. Soft taps like fingers rapping against wood far off in the distance, followed by a faint dragging, as though something heavy was being pulled across the floor behind the shelves. I kept my head down, told myself it was nothing, that basements settle and sounds travel in weird ways down here. But my ears wouldn't stop searching. Every noise echoed louder than it should have, and the shadows seemed to pulse with each flicker of the overhead lights. I tried to focus, to finish my shift, but the warmth from that brief human interaction had long since vanished, replaced by that same gnawing chill creeping back into my bones, and the overwhelming sense that I was no longer alone. It was around 3 a.m. when I noticed a box jutting out near the middle row, teetering slightly off the shelf like it had been disturbed. I set my flashlight down on the damp concrete and reached up, both hands bracing the edges to slide it back into place, but it resisted me. The weight felt uneven, heavier than it should have been for a stack of dry paper. And for a split second, I wondered if moisture had soaked through and warped the contents. I tilted the box gently, listening for a shift inside. But that's when I heard it, a whisper. Not distant this time, not vague or echoing through the aisles. It was right beside my ear, so close that I could feel the air move. I jerked back so hard I almost dropped the box, my pulse exploding in my chest as I spun around, heart in my throat, breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a scream. But there was nothing. Just shelves and shadows and the damp floor gleaming under my flashlight beam. The whisper had been unmistakable, too real, too close, too deliberate. My ears rang with silence. As I tried to steady my hands, every muscle in my body coiled tight with panic. I forced myself to move, grabbing the flashlight, scanning every direction, desperate for some sign of what just happened. That's when I saw it. Another smear on the floor, darker than the last and far wider, stretched like something had been dragged from the shelf toward the far wall. The streak glistened under the beam, sticky and thick, with no clear origin and no discernible scent. Just a black, silent trail that stopped abruptly, halfway down the aisle. I took a step closer, crouched, trying to process what I was looking at when I felt it again. That feeling of being watched, of something unseen pressing in just behind me, not with breath or sound, but with presence. My mouth was dry, my legs trembling, and my fingers were stiff with fear as I straightened up and backed away, unable to turn my back on the corridor. Every instinct screamed to run, but I couldn't. Something in me still needed to know, still needed to understand. And yet, as I stood there, the thought settled like ice in my chest. Maybe I was never meant to understand. Maybe this place doesn't want to be explained. Maybe the whisper wasn't a warning. Maybe it was a welcome. I reported everything the next morning. Well, most of it. I told my supervisor about the strange noises, the whisper that felt like it brushed against my skin, the sticky smears on the floor that came from nowhere and led to nothing. He listened, sort of, eyes fixed on his screen, nodding absently while muttering something about old pipes and poor ventilation. Said he'd have maintenance take a look, maybe send someone from security to do a walkthrough, but I could tell he wasn't really hearing me. I didn't press. What was I supposed to say? That the basement was watching me? That silence had started to sound like breathing? I went home that day, tried to sleep, but my body was still locked in the tension of what I'd felt. And when the sun set, I found myself standing in front of the elevator again, palms damp, heart stuttering, just staring at the button like it was a door to something I couldn't unsee. The basement hadn't changed, of course. Not physically, but I had. Every shift since then has carried a heaviness I can't explain. The lights still flicker, but now they seem to do it only when I'm near, as if reacting to me. Footsteps echo down aisles where no one walks. Faint sounds, drags, taps, distant sighs, leak from between shelves that should hold nothing but paper and dust. And always that pressure in the far corridor, that thick, unmoving air that coils around my throat every time I pass. I don't linger there anymore. I walk fast, avoid looking too long at the shadows, and try not to think about what might be standing just out of sight, watching through the cracks. Each night begins the same way. I stand by the elevator, take a slow breath, and tell myself I'm being ridiculous. But the moment the doors open and I step into that cold, stale air, something inside me shifts. I no longer expect peace. I don't even expect quiet. I expect to be watched. I expect the whisper. I expect the lights to tremble when I pass beneath them. I go through the motions, check the inventory, meet the deliveries, sign the logs. But I'm never really working anymore. I'm listening, waiting. And the worst part is, I know I'm not imagining it. There's no proof, no footage, no footprints, just my own skin crawling. Every time I turn a corner and feel that electric stillness closing in. This fear, it's not just in my head. It's settled into the floor, the shelves, the air. It's part of the basement now. And maybe, somehow, so am I. Story 9. The GPS died somewhere between mile marker 17 and a place that felt like where hope went to rot. No signal, no service, nothing but the low hiss of static crawling through the radio, occasionally interrupted by garbled sounds that might have been Spanish or maybe just wind dragging itself through broken teeth. My 15-year-old Honda wheezed in protest as it clawed its way down a dirt road that didn't seem to exist on any map. Its engine heat inching dangerously close to red, the faint smell of something burning curling through the vents. I hadn't seen another soul in over an hour, and the blackness pressing against the windshield felt thick enough to be alive, like a velvet curtain wrapping around the car and squeezing. I should have stopped. Should have pulled over and let the engine rest. But something in me knew that stopping here would be more than mechanical defeat. It would be surrendering to a presence I couldn't name. Then, just as my resolve began to flicker, I saw the light. Not headlights. No vehicle had passed in what felt like days. This was different. Flickering, golden, like flame. As I drew closer, my foot easing off the accelerator without conscious thought, the light resolved into multiple flames. Lanterns, old-fashioned kerosene ones, held aloft by tall, still figures, standing in a perfect circle in the middle of the road. I stopped the car about 30 yards away, the engine ticking as it cooled. The silence around me so complete it rang in my ears. There were 9 of them, maybe 10. Impossible to tell, because they didn't move, didn't shift, didn't breathe. Each wore what looked like a bed sheet draped over their bodies, soaked and stained with dark blotches that clung to shapes underneath. Shapes that suggested human form but somehow not quite human proportions. They weren't facing me, but I still felt watched. As if their backs could see, as if their very stillness was a kind of gaze. Each held a lantern high above their head, but none of the lanterns glowed. Dark, cold, useless things that somehow felt more threatening than if they'd been lit. The only illumination came from my headlights, which seemed to dissolve at the edge of the circle, as if the darkness there was thicker, more deliberate. I sat frozen behind the wheel, hands locked at 10 and 2, heart a slow hammer in my chest, waiting for someone, anyone to move, but no one did. And the longer they remained still, the more wrong everything felt. Not scary in a traditional sense, but wrong, like a note played half a step off key that keeps echoing in your bones. The rational part of me whispered explanations. Rural performance art, a ceremony I didn't understand, some local tradition I'd stumbled into. But the rest of me, the part that listened to silence and shadows, knew better. I hadn't just found something strange on this godforsaken road. I had found something that had been waiting. I sat motionless behind the wheel, the car's engine gone quiet, except for the soft ticking of cooling metal, my headlights stretching forward into the dark like twin blades of desperate reason. And yet they stopped short, failing to touch the figures just 30 yards ahead. There were 9 of them, maybe 10, arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the road. Unmoving, ghostly shapes draped in what looked like soaked bed sheets. The fabric heavy with moisture and stained with dark splotches that might have been mud, or something worse. The way the fabric clung to them made it obvious there were bodies beneath, but not quite human ones. The proportions were off. Too long in places, too narrow in others, like mannequins shaped by memory rather than anatomy. Each figure held a lantern high above its head, the kind you might find in a century-old barn or hanging from a shepherd's hook. But these were dead, cold, void of any flicker, and somehow that absence of light was more terrifying than flame. The darkness within their circle was thicker than the night around it, almost tactile, as if the air itself had congealed into something that swallowed illumination. I kept expecting one of them to move, to acknowledge me, to break the stillness that had begun to press against my skin like weight. But they remained frozen, faceless, lifeless, staring into the center of their circle, yet somehow aware of me. The road behind was as dark as the one ahead, and for the first time I truly felt nowhere. No town, no name, no witness. The rational part of my brain started building narratives. Some ritual, maybe some strange, rural custom I'd stumbled into, a misinterpretation of culture or context. But that voice felt small, flickering, like a candle in a vacuum. Because there was no breath, no shift of weight, no involuntary twitch or movement. No human being could stand that still for so long without giving some sign of life. These things, whatever they were, didn't breathe, didn't acknowledge time, didn't exist in the same way I did. They simply were. And they had been. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't interrupted something. I'd arrived right on time. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Maybe it was the silence or the way the darkness pressed so heavily against the windshield, but my fingers reached out and flicked the headlights off, plunging everything into suffocating black for a heartbeat that felt like drowning before I turned them back on. The circle was gone. Just like that. Vanished. The road ahead was empty. The packed dirt stretching forward in desolate stillness, nothing but night and dust and the after-image of something that had been there only seconds ago. My breath caught halfway between disbelief and relief until instinct or dread pulled my eyes toward the rearview mirror. And there they were, still standing in their circle, lanterns raised high, white sheets draped in silent accusation. My head whipped around toward the rear window. Nothing, just empty road and darkness. But the mirror showed them clear as day. My blood ran cold. I adjusted the angle slightly, hoping it was some optical trick, a double reflection, a trick of glass and nerves. But no matter how I tilted it, the figures remained, motionless, unreal, and yet more real than anything I had ever seen. That was when I noticed the change. One of them, the one closest to the center of the mirror's frame, had turned its head. Not inward like the rest, but outward toward me, just enough so the fold of its hood cast a new shape, the shadowed suggestion of a face, of a gaze, not observed but observing. I stared, willing it to be imagination, exhaustion, the kind of hallucination that comes from caffeine, and too many hours on the road. But the longer I watched, the more I realized it wasn't just one. Every time I looked, another figure had turned slightly, their featureless heads angling in my direction, like sunflowers drawn to something darker than the sun. It wasn't all at once. It was a slow and methodical acknowledgement, as if the act of me seeing them had triggered something ancient and inevitable. By the time I looked a fourth time, most of them were facing me, still motionless, still bound in their circle, but every faceless gaze now aligned with mine, locked through the thin veil of a mirror that should have only reflected empty space. I turned my head once more. Nothing behind me. Just the soft crunch of gravel under cooling tires. But in the glass, they remained. Present. Patient. Watching. And I felt something cold settle into my spine. A sensation not of being hunted, but expected. I slammed the car into drive and pressed the gas harder than I meant to, tires spitting gravel as I pulled away from the place where the circle had stood, or hadn't. But my eyes kept drifting back to the rear view mirror. Drawn like a compulsion, I couldn't fight. And there they were again, unchanged, unyielding, still arranged in their perfect ring of stillness. Only now, they were following. Not walking, not running, just there, the same exact distance behind me, no matter how far I drove. The road ahead twisted through the dead, frozen flatness of Nebraska fields, but the mirror held them close, tethered to my every move, as though some invisible thread connected their circle to the back of my car. I killed the headlights again, hoping that darkness might break whatever illusion this was, but the mirror still glowed faintly, like it had trapped its own internal light. And in that glow the figures gleamed pale and terrible, drifting through black like jellyfish, through deep ocean. I sped up, pushing the old Honda to its limit. 60, then 70, the frame rattling, tires screaming through each pothole and patch of loose earth. But still, they matched my pace precisely, never falling behind, never gaining, as though they weren't moving through space at all, but simply being, anchored to me by the mirror's gaze. I tried talking aloud, tried convincing myself I was dreaming, hallucinating, anything, but my voice sounded hollow inside the cabin, like it belonged to someone else, someone watching me from just beyond the windshield. The longer I drove, the more wrong it all felt. Not just eerie, but cosmically disjointed, like I'd slipped into a crack in the world, and whatever these things were had been waiting inside it, patient and eternal. After what felt like an hour of endless fields and ghost towns long since dead, I passed a county line sign. so weathered and sun-bleached I couldn't even make out the name, but in that moment something changed. The circle behind me began to shift. Subtle at first, a slight imbalance, a figure leaning forward, and then I watched, helpless and frozen, as the formation dissolved. One by one, they stepped forward from the ring and began walking, not along the road, but toward me, toward my car, toward the mirror, moving, not like people, but like things unbothered by distance, dissolving into the reflection as though the glass wasn't reflecting at all, but receiving. That was when it hit me. The mirror wasn't just showing what was behind me. It was a door, and they had started walking through it. I hit the brakes so hard, the car skidded sideways across the gravel road, dust curling up around me in ghostly sheets, the sudden silence pressing in like a vacuum after the screech of tires faded into nothing. My hands were shaking as I turned in my seat, heart hammering against my ribs, breath caught halfway between fear and disbelief. But there was nothing there. The road behind me was completely, utterly empty. No circle, no figures, no movement. Just the long, dark ribbon of nowhere, unraveling back into the night. And then, as if drawn by instinct more than thought, my eyes drifted upward to the rearview mirror, and I saw it. One figure, standing directly behind my car, closer than ever. So close I could see the weave of the fabric in its mud-streaked sheet, the way the material clung slightly as if damp, the hood casting its face into deep, unknowable shadow. But I felt it looking at me, not through sight, but with presence, as if attention itself had become something physical, something pressing coldly against the back of my skull. I spun around again, nothing, just the empty road and the creak of the car settling in the night air. But when I looked back at the mirror, the figure hadn't moved, yet somehow it felt closer. The frame of the mirror no longer a barrier, but a tunnel narrowing toward inevitability. I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then fell dead. Again, nothing but the grinding clatter of a starter that didn't want to catch. The burning smell from earlier thickened, and for a moment I wondered if the engine was bleeding itself out. Third try, still nothing. The silence felt heavier now, thicker, like a room filling with water. Then, fourth time, the engine roared to life, sudden and furious, and I didn't hesitate. I threw it into drive and punched the accelerator, the wheels lurching against the gravel as the car surged forward, and still, I didn't look back. Not with my eyes, not directly. But the mirror was there. Always there. And though it showed only the stretch of road falling behind me, I could feel them again. Not see. Feel. A pressure in the ears, the way the air gets just before a storm breaks, as if the atmosphere itself had become aware of me. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. They were still there, just outside the limits of vision, waiting at the edge of the reflection where things linger that aren't meant to be seen head on. I drove through the night with no sense of time, the road unraveling beneath my tires like a ribbon of dread, passing through towns that felt more like memories than places, buildings slumped in shadows, streetlights long dead, windows blank and dark as hollow eyes. No signs of life, no signs of anything, just silence so absolute it rang in my ears. and the endless pull of the mirror at the edge of my vision, daring me to look. But I didn't. Not again. I kept my eyes forward, hands locked tight around the wheel, trying to believe that movement itself might be a kind of protection. Eventually, the road changed beneath me, gravel giving way to cracked asphalt, the lines of fences and telephone poles reappearing like bones of a forgotten world. And then, as the sky began to lighten with the faintest gray of approaching dawn, I saw it. A truck stop, buzzing with the dull neon promise of coffee and warmth and people. I pulled into the lot like a drowning man clawing for shore. The sudden return of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of 18-wheelers, almost enough to convince me I'd made it back. I sat there for a long while, engine idling, just staring at the rearview mirror. And this time, it showed nothing but what it should. An empty lot, a quiet road, the ordinary sprawl of civilization slowly waking. No circle, no figures, just the world I remembered. I let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours, even laughed a little under my breath at how tightly I'd been holding onto the wheel. And then, without really thinking, I glanced to my left, toward the passenger side window where my reflection should have been. But it wasn't me staring back. It was a shape cloaked in white, its sheet stained with something dark and soaking, a lantern cradled in its arms like an offering, its hooded head tilted ever so slightly as if listening. I blinked, heart freezing, and the reflection shifted. Just a tired man, sleepless, haunted, hollow-eyed, and unshaven, staring at his own fear. But I didn't look again. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the light of the truck stop without glancing at another pane of glass, because in that moment I knew whatever I'd seen on that road hadn't stayed behind. It was still with me, and it was learning how to wear my face. I've never gone back to that road. Not because I couldn't find it again, but because I'm not sure it ever really existed in the way normal places do, in the way places are supposed to. I told the interviewer I'd had car trouble, and they were understanding, said we could reschedule, but I never called them back. That job, that whole direction my life was heading, it all started to feel like a path meant for someone else, like something I'd glimpsed from outside a window I was never supposed to peer through. These days I stick to main highways, broad interstates lined with gas stations and billboards and traffic, anything that feels human, familiar. I don't trust GPS anymore, carry a paper atlas in the glove box like some old man from a different time, and I only drive during daylight hours. But even with those precautions, there are moments, quiet stretches between towns, empty roads bathed in the dim glow of dusk, when I glance at the mirror and catch something, a flicker, a shimmer, the ghost of white fabric, shifting just out of sync with the rest of the world. Sometimes it's the faint suggestion of a lantern being raised in slow, patient ritual. Sometimes it's just the unbearable certainty that something is watching, even if I can't see it. I avoid reflections now. I find reasons not to look into windows, to keep the mirrors in my home covered, the chrome of car bumpers smudged and dulled, because I've learned something I can't unlearn. Every mirror is a doorway. Not all of them open outward, some of them open inward. And if you look too long, too carefully, you might not just see something looking back. You might find yourself beginning to change, to feel it crawling just beneath the surface of your skin, wearing your breath, your voice, like borrowed clothing. I don't know if what I saw was real or if it was some manifestation of exhaustion, of isolation, of the strange madness that waits on the edge of long, empty roads. But I know this, those figures are still out there, somewhere just behind the glass, waiting with their dark lanterns and their quiet attention, patient in a way only things without time can be. They're waiting for the next traveler to get lost, for the next mirror to unlock. Or maybe they're not waiting at all. Maybe they're following. Maybe they've already stepped through. Maybe they're just waiting for me to look again. Story 10. The lights carved a narrow path through the ink of the Idaho desert. 2 pale beams dissolving into the void, just a few feet ahead. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight. Eyes dry, hands clenched, mind fogged with that strange, vibrating edge of exhaustion. The radio had died back past Boise, swallowed by static and silence, leaving only the hum of the engine and the breathy whisper of wind pressing against the windows. It was 3:00 a.m. The witching hour, my grandmother used to say, when the veil thins and things on the other side press closer. I used to laugh at that. But tonight, wrapped in this vast emptiness, with no other lights, no signs of life, just this dark ribbon of road unraveling beneath me, her words didn't sound so ridiculous. I should have stopped. There was a truck stop 100 miles back, maybe a crusty little motel with burnt coffee and buzzing fluorescents. But something made me keep going. A pull. Not a thought, not even a feeling, more like a whisper under the skin, a pressure behind the eyes. My hands refused to turn the wheel toward safety. I told myself it was just momentum, just wanting to get somewhere by sunrise. But somewhere deep in my gut, I knew that wasn't it. I wasn't just driving. I was being drawn. The sky above stretched starless and blank. A lid clamped shut on the world, and every mile I passed felt less like progress and more like descent. My reflection in the rear-view mirror looked off, tired, yes, but something more, like it was watching me instead of being me. The further I went, the more the desert seemed to lean in, shrubs clawing at the edges of the road, darkness thickening like wet velvet. I started to feel like I wasn't alone out there, like something had noticed me the moment I entered this stretch of nowhere, and was now waiting patiently, just ahead or just behind. And still, I didn't stop. I couldn't. The wheel felt locked in place, and even the thought of turning around filled me with a kind of dread I couldn't explain. Somewhere out there, something was waiting, and I was heading straight for it. I saw it first as a silhouette, something darker than the darkness itself, standing dead center in the road, a jagged interruption in the endless black ribbon of highway. I eased off the gas, squinting, pulse ticking faster as the headlights crawled forward and revealed what waited for me. A scarecrow. Or at least that's what it looked like at first. But this wasn't some sun-bleached bundle of rags flapping in a cornfield. This thing wore a black suit. Crisp, clean, funeral tier formal, with a thin tie hanging dead straight and polished shoes that caught my headlights and reflected them with an unnatural gleam. Its face was burlap, stitched in place but straw poked from the collar and cuffs, almost deliberately styled. There were no farms here, no fields, no homes for miles, just dust, scrub brush, and the whispering ache of emptiness pressing in from every side. I swung the wheel to the left, giving it a wide berth, and cracked the window for air. That's when it moved. The head snapped toward me, not turned, not swayed, but snapped, like an animal locking onto prey. And then, from that stitched and twisted face, it spoke. Marcus? My name. No rise in pitch, no inflection. Just a rasp, like leaves on concrete, like it had been practicing the syllables in secret, waiting for this moment. My foot slammed the gas before my brain caught up. Instinct wrenching me forward, gravel kicking up beneath the tires. In the mirror, it dwindled, then vanished. But the damage had already been done. My thoughts clawed for logic. Fatigue, stress, hallucination, but nothing fit. Scarecrows don't wear designer suits. Scarecrows don't speak. Scarecrows don't know your name. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't been random. It had been waiting. For me. The road ahead stretched on, but every inch of me felt like I was already off the map, already somewhere I wasn't meant to be. I could feel it now. Something had seen me, marked me, and I was no longer just a driver in the dark. I was part of something I didn't understand. And the night had only just begun to show its teeth. 20 minutes after the scarecrow vanished into the dark behind me, I reached for my water bottle, hoping to wash away the lingering taste of fear. And that's when I noticed it. The glove compartment, wide open, though I was certain I'd left it shut. Always did. My heart skipped as I leaned over, drawn not just by curiosity, but something subtler, heavier, like gravity turned sideways. Inside, folded with uncanny precision where my registration should have been, was a black suit. Not just any suit, the suit. The same immaculate cut, the same funereal elegance worn by that thing in the road. I touched the fabric, and a chill soaked into my skin. The silk lining was damp, slick with a liquid that clung like half-melted ice. It had no scent, no color, no taste, only a strange, spreading numbness. When I pressed a fingertip to my tongue, like my nerves recoiled from it. I should have thrown it out the window, left it on the asphalt for the coyotes and sand. But I didn't. I held it up under the dome light, staring at the way the threads caught the shadows. The stitching was flawless, the size exact, not approximate, perfect, as if tailored for me right down to the slope of my left shoulder and the reach of my arms. The thought slithered into my mind like smoke. You should try it on. I recoiled, stuffed it back in, slammed the compartment closed so hard the latch cracked. The echo sounded like a shot in the tight confines of the car. My reflection in the rear view looked pale and hunted, eyes too wide, pupils pinpricks in the dim glow. I tried to rationalize. Someone must have slipped it in while I was getting gas. But the memory of that stop was vague, hollow. Had I even gone inside to pay? Had I locked the doors? The more I searched, the more the answers unraveled like wet paper. I was no longer sure what had happened, only that whatever this was, it wasn't random. The suit hadn't appeared, it had been placed. And whoever, or whatever, had placed it, knew me. The road began to feel different beneath my tires, narrower, as if the asphalt were shrinking inch by inch while the desert pressed in from both sides, dense with overgrown brush that clawed against the car like brittle fingers. The air had changed too, heavier somehow, thick and expectant, like the breath of something waiting just beyond sight. I kept my eyes forward, knuckles white on the wheel, but soon the feeling grew impossible to ignore. Figures, dark and still, began to appear along the roadside. At first they were only flashes in the corner of my vision, shadows that could have been trees or tricks of light, but as the miles passed, they drew closer, clearer. Men, or things shaped like men, dressed in black suits, identical to the one in my glove compartment. They didn't move, they didn't speak. They only watched. One after another, lined up like sentinels, with no faces I could see, no eyes I could meet, and yet I could feel their gaze like weight on my chest. I gritted my teeth, forced myself not to look directly at them, but the pressure built with each passing second. A silent demand that echoed louder than any scream. Something wanted me to stop. Not just to pull over, but to join. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. Deep in the marrow. My hands began turning the wheel on their own, fingers twitching toward the shoulder, and panic seized my throat. I bit down, hard, sinking my teeth into my tongue until I tasted blood, copper and warm, grounding me back to myself. The compulsion faltered just long enough for me to snap the wheel straight, to fight off whatever was crawling into my mind and steering me toward them. But even with the car under control again, the dread didn't fade. It lingered like something coiled in the back seat, breathing softly, biding its time. I knew then that the watchers weren't just lining the road, they were guiding it, herding me. And whatever destination they had in mind, I was already too deep to turn around. Somewhere between the last stretch of endless blacktop and the growing unease in my chest, time slipped. I glanced at the dashboard and the clock read 4:17 a.m. But that couldn't be right. I had looked just after the Scarecrow incident, and it had barely been 3. I hadn't driven long enough to lose more than an hour, but something told me I wasn't just behind on time. I was outside of it. My fuel gauge showed more than it should have, creeping toward full even though I hadn't stopped again. My shoes were gritty with sand, the fine powder of desert dust clinging between my toes. And yet I had no memory of stepping out of the car. I reached for my water bottle in the cup holder, but it wasn't there. In its place was a business card, black matte, heavy stock, the kind you only see at elite functions or in nightmares. No name, no phone number, just an address, 1247 Meridian Road. And beneath that, in silver foil letters, one word: midnight. The moment I read it, something inside me shifted. I knew that address. I didn't know how, but the path to it unfolded in my mind like a map I'd driven 100 times. Turn left at the next junction, 3 miles straight, right onto a dirt road that wouldn't be listed on any GPS. The directions weren't just clear, they were alive in me, embedded like instinct. And when I tried to resist, My hands twitched toward the wheel again. It was like being a passenger in my own body. Awareness intact but powerless against the pull. I told myself to ignore it, to drive to the nearest gas station, to see another human face. But the deeper I breathed, the more the road behind me felt like fiction. Only the way forward felt real. And the strange thing was, I wasn't even afraid anymore. Not in the normal sense. I was calm, almost peaceful, like someone walking toward the answer to a question they never knew they'd asked. But under that calm was something colder, something waiting. Because I hadn't just found that card, it had been placed there, and whoever left it knew I would follow. The dirt road ended in a clearing swallowed by shadow where a single building sat low and windowless beneath the weight of the stars. There were no signs, no markings, no reason for it to exist out here in the middle of nowhere. Yet a warm, yellow light seeped from beneath the door, like a wound glowing from within. I parked and sat motionless, engine humming, heart hammering, staring at that sliver of illumination, while the silence outside coiled tight around me. They were already there, the watchers. I hadn't seen them emerge from the brush, hadn't heard a single footstep, but now they stood in a perfect circle around the building, shoulder to shoulder, faceless and still, each one cloaked in the same black suit, their presence patient and suffocating. I didn't remember opening the glove compartment, but the suit was in my hands, dry now, no longer cold, yet still pulsing with something that wasn't heat. When I draped it over my arm, the fabric folded itself with unnatural ease, as if it recognized me. I stepped out of the car. The watchers parted without a word, their formation shifting just enough to let me pass without brushing them. The door opened at my touch, too easily, like it had been expecting me. The air inside was heavy with candle smoke and something older, something like dust and memory. Dozens of candles lined the walls, casting flickering shadows that moved just a beat behind me. And in the center stood a mirror, tall and ornate, framed in blackened silver that rippled like water. I knew, without question, what I was supposed to do. I slipped into the suit. It hugged every inch of me like it had been born from my skin, every seam tailored to the quiet asymmetries of my body. As I approached the mirror, the flame light bent around me, and I saw myself, but not. The man in the glass was older, sharper, with eyes like obsidian wells, filled with knowledge I hadn't earned. Behind him stood hundreds more, each one wearing the same suit, standing in rows that vanished into the mirror's depthless reflection. My reflection smiled, though I didn't. It raised a hand in greeting, though mine hung frozen. And when it spoke, I heard the voice again, that voice from the road, from the straw face and twisted jaw, whispering, "Welcome home, Marcus." The mirror didn't just reflect. It reached. One moment I was staring into the eyes of the other me, that older, colder version whose gaze held lifetimes I hadn't lived. And the next, his hand was breaching the surface like it was water made of silver and smoke. Fingers gripped my wrist, icy, electric, impossible. and the room around me folded inward, as if the air had weight, as if the world itself had turned fluid. I tried to pull back, to scream, to run, but my body was no longer listening, and the mirror swallowed me whole. I fell without falling, spiraled through a light that wasn't light, a cold that had teeth and intention, and then nothing. I woke with sunlight in my eyes, the familiar hum of my car beneath me, parked neatly on the shoulder of a highway I didn't remember reaching. My hands gripped the steering wheel as if they'd never let go, and for a moment I thought I dreamed it all. But then I noticed the little things. My clothes were normal again, jeans, t-shirt, sneakers, but there was no sign of the suit, not in the glove compartment, not on the seat, gone, like it had never existed. Except it had. Because tucked behind my driver's license and my wallet was that same black card, smooth and weighty, with the silver address, Tuanwu 47 Meridian Road, and below it that same single word, midnight. My fingers trembled as I slid the card back, but it was the ache on my wrist that truly made my blood run cold. When I turned my hand, I saw it. Faint, almost invisible, unless caught in just the right angle of light. A pale, perfect circle etched into my skin, like frostbite from a grip that never let go. I rubbed at it, hoping it would fade, but it didn't. And even as the sun bathed the desert in gold and the morning wind stirred the dust, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that maybe the man in the mirror didn't just greet me. Maybe he traded places. Maybe I never came back the same. I've been driving east for 3 days now, chasing the illusion of safety, of civilization, of neon lights and gas stations where the coffee is bad and the voices are human. But no matter how many miles I put behind me, the desert never really lets go. Each night, when the sun sinks low and the shadows stretch long across the asphalt, I start to see them again, just at the edges of my vision. Barely there, but unmistakable. The Watchers, standing still among the brush, their black suits blending into the dark, their heads tilted ever so slightly toward my car. They never move. They don't have to. I know they're there, and they know I see them. I tell myself I'm just tired, that the lack of sleep is making my mind fold in on itself, but I know better. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection in the rearview mirror, I don't recognize the face staring back. It's still me, but not quite. Older, colder, with eyes that feel too heavy in my skull, like they've carried too many secrets for far too long. And worse, sometimes it looks back at me before I even glance its way, as if it's been watching me this whole time, waiting for me to notice. The mark on my wrist, that pale ring where the mirror hand gripped me, has started to darken, deepening into my skin, like a bruise that won't heal. I tried covering it with a bandage, then with a watch, but nothing stops the cold I feel when I touch it. Like something still lingers beneath the surface, waiting to bloom. I don't sleep. I don't dare. Not because of nightmares, but because I'm afraid I'll wake up again in the wrong place, in the wrong body, wearing the wrong face. Something changed that night in the candlelit room. Maybe I crossed a threshold. Maybe something crossed into me. I don't know how much longer I can keep driving before the road runs out, or before the man in the mirror decides it's his turn again.